If you're ready to rest, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax your body, and drift into a slower time. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. If you were trudging through the mud of 17th century England, you'd probably find it a bit grim. Picture this: the year is 1642, and a certain Isaac Newton is born into a world where the bubonic plague is a part-time resident and science is still trying to shake off its alchemical hangover. Isaac's childhood home wasn't the bustling metropolis you'd expect for a genius in the making. Nope, it was the humble Woolsthorpe Manor in Lincolnshire, a quaint patch of countryside about 100 miles north of London, where the sheep outnumbered people and the nearest coffee shop was, well, non-existent. Let's get one thing straight. Isaac Newton was not your typical farm boy. Sure, he was born on Christmas Day, but the gifts he received weren't quite the stuff of legend. Instead of wise men, he got a dead father who passed 3 months before his birth. And instead of gold, frankincense and myrrh, he got a mother, Hannah Ayscough Newton, who remarried and left him with his grandparents at just 3 years old. Thanks, Mom. So, young Isaac grew up with a chip on his shoulder, which, let's be honest, probably helped him calculate the exact force needed to knock it off. Now, Woolsthorpe wasn't exactly a scientific hub. It was more of a place where farming was king and every boy was expected to know his way around a plough. Isaac, however, had other ideas. He was a bit of an odd duck, an outlier who preferred fiddling with gadgets over tending to livestock. You could say his experiments were a little ahead of their time. For instance, Newton had a thing for sundials. Sounds quaint, right? But young Isaac took it to another level. He transformed his family estate into a sundial showroom, rigging up elaborate time-telling devices wherever the sun dared to shine. Not bad for a kid who probably got told to get outside and play one too many times. But farming? Oh dear. Newton's attempts at agriculture were, let's say, less fruitful. Picture a boy who'd rather measure the angle of the sun than dig deep holes in the ground. His farming efforts were about as successful as a fish on a bicycle. It turns out, predicting the trajectory of celestial bodies doesn't help your carrots grow any faster. He was more interested in understanding why the apple falls than in cultivating the tree from which it came. The socio-political scene of 17th century England was no less turbulent than Newton's personal life. The country was embroiled in civil war, with Parliament and the monarchy engaging in a serious spat over who got to wear the fanciest hat and hold the most power. Meanwhile, science was staging its own rebellion, casting off the chains of medieval superstition. Alchemy, with its promises of turning lead into gold, was slowly being replaced by the more grounded principles of observation and experimentation. In this world, Newton's curiosity was like a match in a powder keg. Despite his eccentricities, Newton wasn't entirely alone in his intellectual pursuits. He attended the King's School in Grantham, where he lived with the local apothecary, William Clarke. Clarke's library was a treasure trove for the young Newton, filled with books that were likely far more appealing than any chore list. It was in this environment that Isaac honed his knack for the sciences, embracing the mathematical and mechanical with the kind of zeal usually reserved for teenage crushes. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. Newton's school years were marked by a few scuffles. Literal ones. As the story goes, Isaac got into a fistfight with a classmate, which led to a rivalry that spurred him to academic greatness. Nothing like a little competition to light a fire under you, right? Legend has it that the fight took place near a windmill, which Newton later used as inspiration for his own miniature version. Instead of grinding grain, though, his windmill was powered by a mouse on a treadmill. This was Isaac Newton, the boy who turned even a rodent into a scientific instrument. The world was not yet ready for a Newton, but Isaac was gearing up to redefine it. In the sleepy fields of Woolsthorpe, a young boy was laying the groundwork for a revolution that would eventually see apples and gravity fall from the same tree. He was an enigma, wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in a woolen coat against the English chill. As he tinkered with sundials and toy windmills, little did anyone know that this peculiar lad, with a penchant for fighting and farming failures, would go on to change not just the scientific landscape, but the entire world forever. So, here we are, with young Isaac Newton poised on the brink of greatness, the sleepy fields of Woolsthorpe growing increasingly inadequate for his burgeoning intellect. The year was 1661, and Newton, armed with a scholarship, found his way to Trinity College, Cambridge, a place that promised to be as much a crucible for his genius as it was a haven for academic squabbling. Cambridge at the time was a bit of an academic kaleidoscope, where the old Aristotelian doctrines were starting to feel like yesterday's news, and the new science was the hot gossip. It was here that Newton's obsessive tendencies really found their stride. Forget the quintessential image of a college student partying until dawn. Newton was the guy who'd rather stay in his room, furiously scribbling equations while everyone else was busy discovering the joys of ale, and boy did he scribble. Newton's notebooks were a chaotic masterpiece, filled with doodles of mathematical concepts and half-formed ideas that would later change the course of science. Let's talk about his fixation with calculus, or as he called it, the method of fluxions. Sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, right? But this was no magic trick. Newton was developing a mathematical framework that would allow him to describe motion and change with unprecedented precision. Imagine trying to understand the universe's clockwork without knowing how the gears of calculus turned. And while Newton was busy calculating the nature of reality, his academic peers were probably just trying to calculate how to get out of an exam. But here's a twist. Newton's calculus wasn't the only game in town. Enter Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a German polymath who developed his own version of calculus around the same time. This sparked a legendary feud that makes modern academic rivalries look like playground squabbles. Each accused the other of plagiarism, and the debate raged on, fueled by national pride and a healthy dose of ego. The irony? Both men probably spent more time fighting over who invented calculus than they did actually using it. The real kicker is that both versions of calculus are used today, but back then it was a battle royale of brains. Now, if you think Newton's obsession stopped at numbers, think again. His curiosity extended to the nature of light and optics. Picture this, Newton, in a dimly lit room, shoving a needle behind his eye socket. Why? To understand how light and vision work. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the kind of experiment that ends well. He managed to see colourful spots, which is, I guess, one way to achieve enlightenment. But seriously, Newton's experiments with prisms and light laid the groundwork for our understanding of colour and the nature of light. He demonstrated that white light is actually a mixture of colours. A revelation as profound as realizing your favourite Instagram filter isn't real life. Newton's time at Cambridge wasn't all about solitary genius, though. The college was a hotbed of intellectual activity, with lectures that could range from the mind-numbingly dull to the breathtakingly innovative. Newton, never one to take things at face value, often skipped the formal lectures to dive deep into self-study. His approach? Question everything, accept nothing without proof. It was this relentless pursuit of truth that set him apart. While his peers might have been content with rote learning, Newton was busy dissecting the universe, one equation at a time. Yet, for all his brilliance, Newton was no social butterfly. He was the archetype of the absent-minded professor, often lost in thought, with little time for the niceties of social interaction. His solitary habits were both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they allowed him the focus needed to develop his groundbreaking theories. On the other, they isolated him from the broader academic community, making him somewhat of an enigmatic figure, even among his contemporaries. Despite these quirks, Newton's impact on Cambridge was undeniable. By the time he completed his studies, he had not only absorbed the knowledge of his predecessors, but had also laid the foundations for his future discoveries. He was like a sponge, soaking up the intellectual currents of his time, yet constantly wringing them out to extract only the most essential truths. As Newton's academic journey at Cambridge drew to a close, the world outside was slowly waking up to the realization that a new scientific age was dawning. The old ways of thinking were being challenged, and Newton was at the forefront of this revolution. His time at Cambridge had been a period of intense personal and intellectual growth, setting the stage for the remarkable contributions he would make in the years to come. And so, with a mind sharper than the needle he once used for his optic experiments, Newton was ready to step into the world, a world that was about to be profoundly changed by his insights. But that's a story for another day. For now, suffice it to say that Isaac Newton was no ordinary scholar. He was a force of nature, a mind as brilliant as it was solitary, and a man whose pursuit of knowledge knew no bounds. Stay tuned, because the apple has only just begun to fall. So, with Newton poised to turn the world on its head, let's dive into one of history's most famous moments, an apple tumbling from a tree. Ah yes, the classic apple on the head story, the fairy tale that every schoolchild learns. But let's not kid ourselves. Newton's eureka moment wasn't quite the cartoonish slapstick it's made out to be. In reality, Newton never claimed the apple hit him. Instead, as he later recounted to his biographer, William Stukeley, he merely observed one falling during a contemplative afternoon in his garden. The real kicker? This wasn't even in Cambridge. It was back in the familiar fields of Woolsthorpe during the plague years of 1666, when he was self-isolating before it became trendy. So, what inspired Newton as he watched that apple descend? A profound realization that gravity wasn't just a local phenomenon affecting apples and clumsy humans, but a universal force pulling the moon towards Earth, and indeed holding the cosmos together. This was no small leap of logic. It was Olympic-level mental gymnastics. In a time when people still attributed diseases to bad air, Newton was busy uniting celestial and terrestrial mechanics under one gravitational umbrella. Now, let's talk about those mathematical proofs, the ones that would make your eyes glaze over faster than a PowerPoint presentation on tax law. Newton's magnum opus, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or just Principia for those who prefer brevity, wasn't exactly light reading. Published in 1687, this tome was a 500-page journey through the labyrinth of Newton's mind, written in the kind of Latin that would make a Roman senator reach for his dictionary. But buried within were the laws of motion and universal gravitation, equations so critical they might as well have been chiseled on stone tablets. These weren't just theoretical musings. Newton's work laid the groundwork for calculating everything from the trajectory of cannonballs to the orbits of planets, and he did it with an elegance that belied the grind behind the scenes. He introduced the concept of inertia, the idea that an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an external force. Sound familiar? It's basically why your morning coffee stays put until you decide to provide the external force by knocking it over. But Newton wasn't working in a vacuum, metaphorically speaking. Enter Robert Hooke, the man who could have been Newton's scientific ally but ended up more like his arch-nemesis. Hooke, a man of many talents and even more grievances, served as the curator of experiments at the Royal Society. He was known for his work on microscopy and elasticity, and for having a face that only history could forget, as no verified portrait of him survives. Hooke was the guy who squinted at Newton's equations and claimed that he'd already thought of that. Sharing might be caring, but Hooke could have used a lesson in citation etiquette. The rivalry between Newton and Hooke was like a 17th-century version of a Twitter spat. Their letters were filled with veiled insults and not-so-subtle jabs. Hooke insisted that he had given Newton the idea of gravitational attraction, while Newton, with all the grace of a man who'd actually done the work, was having none of it. Their feud peaked when Hooke accused Newton of plagiarism regarding the inverse square law, which describes how the force of gravity diminishes with distance. Newton, in turn, claimed that Hooke had contributed nothing but the barest hints to the concept. This wasn't just two men arguing over intellectual property. It was a microcosm of the broader scientific and political rivalries of the era. England in the late 17th century was a hotbed of innovation, but also of competition. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, was both a beacon of scientific progress and a breeding ground for egos larger than the universe they were trying to understand. It was in this charged atmosphere that Newton's ideas found both supporters and detractors. In the end, Newton's reputation and his mathematical prowess won out, but not without leaving a few bruised egos in his wake. Hooke passed away in 1703, and Newton, perhaps with a touch of pettiness, became president of the Royal Society the same year. One of his first acts? Overseeing the redesign of the Society's insignia, which conveniently omitted any mention of Hooke's contributions. Talk about writing history. Yet, for all his professional triumphs, Newton was a man of contradictions. He could be ruthlessly competitive, yet he shunned the public spotlight. He was a genius in mathematics and physics, but also dabbled in alchemy and biblical chronology, searching for hidden codes in the Bible as fervently as he searched for the secrets of the universe. Newton was a polymath who could calculate the trajectory of a comet, but might forget your name in the process. As we unpack the legend and reality of that infamous apple moment, we're left with a picture of Newton that's both awe-inspiring and deeply human. He was not the aloof, solitary genius of myth, nor was he merely a product of his time. Newton was a man who straddled the line between the mystical and the rational, between the old world and the new. His theories of gravity didn't just change science, they changed our understanding of reality itself. And yet, in the competitive world of 17th century science, where every discovery was a battleground, Newton's greatest rivalry was perhaps with no one but himself. As Newton's story unfolds, remember that the apple was only the beginning. The real fruit of his labour was a new world view, one where the cosmos wasn't just a celestial dance, but a clockwork mechanism governed by laws as precise as his calculations. But don't put away your telescope just yet. There's still more to discover in the universe of Newton's mind. Stay tuned, because the apple may have fallen, but the story is far from over. And so, as Newton continued to unravel the cosmos, he was also turning his gaze toward more terrestrial concerns. Picture this: a man who could calculate the motion of the heavens, yet found himself increasingly embroiled in the gritty world of finance and fraud. Enter the Royal Mint, a place where Isaac Newton would trade the apple orchards of Woolsthorpe for the pounding presses of London's money-making machine. Now, the Royal Mint was no ordinary mint. It was the front line in the war against a rampant problem coin counterfeiting. Imagine the economic climate of late 17th century England. The country's currency resembled Swiss cheese, riddled with holes left by clippers who shaved off precious metal. The result? A financial system about as stable as a Jenga tower in a breeze. In 1696, Newton was appointed Warden of the Mint, a role less about ceremonial duties and more about playing detective. He wasn't just crunching numbers, he was cracking down on counterfeiters with the zeal of a crime scene investigator. And for Newton, this wasn't just a side gig. The position paid a tidy sum, $500 a year, a veritable fortune in those days, equivalent to about $80,000 today. It allowed him to indulge in his more esoteric pursuits, like alchemy and the quest for the philosopher's stone, which, spoiler alert, he never found. Newton approached the problem of counterfeiting with the same meticulous rigor he applied to his scientific endeavors. He personally oversaw the recoinage process, which involved melting down old coins and producing new ones with milled edges, an innovation that made it much harder to shave off bits undetected. The operation was vast, with over 2.5 million worth of coins recalled, an astronomical figure considering the era's economy. But let's not paint Newton as some bureaucratic superhero without considering the darker shades of his portrait. His pursuit of counterfeiters was relentless and, at times, ruthless. He conducted over 100 cross-examinations, often going undercover to gather evidence. One notorious criminal, William Challoner, a master counterfeiter, found himself on the wrong end of Newton's investigations. Challoner was a man of many talents, none of them legal, and his downfall was as spectacular as his counterfeiting prowess. Newton's tireless efforts culminated in Challoner's trial and execution in 1699, a stark reminder of the harsh justice of the time. While Newton was busy playing coin cop, his scientific mind never truly switched off. His alchemical experiments, which might sound like the stuff of medieval fantasy, were part of a broader intellectual context. Alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold, it was a philosophical and spiritual quest for understanding the natural world. Newton's notebooks are filled with cryptic references to alchemical texts, revealing a man deeply fascinated by the hidden forces of nature, a curiosity that sometimes bordered on obsession. The Royal Mint provided Newton with resources and prestige, but it also exposed him to the politics and power struggles of the era. The late 17th century was a period of immense change, economically and politically. The Bank of England had been founded just 2 years before Newton's appointment, marking the beginning of modern banking. England was transitioning from a feudal economy to a capitalist one, and currency stability was crucial for this transformation. Yet, Newton's silver bullet for coinage reform didn't come without its own set of challenges. The recoinage process was fraught with logistical nightmares and public unrest. The recall of old coins created a temporary shortage of currency, leading to economic strain and social discontent. It's a classic case of no good deed going unpunished, where the solution to one problem sows the seeds of another. Despite these challenges, Newton's reforms laid the groundwork for a more stable monetary system. His tenure at the Mint wasn't just a footnote in his illustrious career. It was a critical chapter that showcased his versatility and impact on areas far beyond physics and mathematics. It was a testament to his ability to apply his analytical mind to practical problems, a skill that remains as relevant today as it was in his time. Now, let's not forget Newton's side hustle in alchemy. This wasn't merely a quirky hobby. It was a deeply serious pursuit that occupied much of his time and energy. Newton's alchemical studies were extensive, spanning over 1 million words of notes and manuscripts. He was notorious for his secrecy, often writing in code to keep his findings away from prying eyes. In a world that was increasingly embracing the scientific method, Newton's alchemy might seem like a step back into the mystical. But for him, it was all part of the same quest, unraveling the mysteries of the universe, whether through equations or elixirs. Newton's fascination with alchemy was tied to his broader interests in ancient wisdom and esoteric knowledge. He believed that the ancients had glimpsed truths that modern science had yet to rediscover. This belief fueled his search for the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance said to grant eternal life and turn base metals into gold. While he never succeeded, these pursuits reveal a side of Newton that's often overshadowed by his scientific achievements, a man captivated by the idea that there was more to the world than met the rational eye. In Newton's time, the line between science and mysticism was blurred. Alchemy wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a living discipline that attracted some of the brightest minds. And Newton, ever the seeker of hidden truths, was drawn to its potential. He saw no contradiction in exploring both the mathematical and the mystical, viewing them as different paths leading to the same ultimate goal: understanding the cosmos. As Newton's story at the Royal Mint unfolds, it becomes clear that his contributions went beyond coins and currency. He was a man who straddled the realms of science and sorcery, finance and philosophy. His legacy in these areas is a testament to his extraordinary intellect and insatiable curiosity, qualities that continue to inspire and intrigue to this day. And so, with Newton's feet firmly planted in the world of finance, his mind was free to wander the endless corridors of possibility where science and magic danced a curious waltz. But don't put away your alchemical text just yet. There's still more to explore in the labyrinthine world of Isaac Newton's mind. Stay tuned, because in the universe of Newton, the boundaries are only as real as our imagination allows. In the swirling chaos of Newton's multifaceted life, his tenure at the Royal Mint was just one chapter in an epic saga that blended genius, quirk, and a relentless quest for understanding everything from the cosmos to coins. By 1703, Newton had ascended to the presidency of the Royal Society, a post that offered him both prestige and the perfect platform for his particular brand of intellectual dominance. In this role, he wasn't just another figurehead, he was the gravitational force pulling the scientific community into his orbit. But let's not pretend that Newton's presidency was all about kumbayas and scientific harmony. No, sir. Newton was as temperamental as the English weather. He was known for his sharp wit and sharper tongue, a man who could cut through scientific pretension like a knife through butter. His meetings of the Royal Society were less about tea and crumpets and more about intellectual jousting matches. Newton had a penchant for holding grudges that could outlast a geologic epoch. Just ask anyone who dared to cross him, like poor John Flamsteed, the astronomer royal, who found himself on the wrong end of Newton's ire. Their feud over astronomical data was a saga of stolen manuscripts and public shaming, proving that even in science, drama was never far behind. Yet, as much as Newton loved a good intellectual brawl, he was slowly shifting away from the hardcore science that had defined his early years. By the time he took over the Royal Society, Newton's interests had started to meander into the realms of theology and philosophy. He traded equations for eschatology, turning his prodigious intellect toward unraveling the mysteries of the divine. It's as if he had calculated the cosmos into submission and then thought, what's next? Ah, the apocalypse. Newton's religious musings were nothing short of complex. He was obsessed with decoding biblical prophecies, convinced there were secret messages encrypted in Scripture just waiting for a mind like his to crack them open. He wasn't your typical Sunday sermon-goer, though. Newton's approach was more akin to a scholarly scavenger hunt, seeking divine truths hidden behind layers of ancient text. It was a shift that puzzled many of his contemporaries, but made perfect sense to Newton, who saw no contradiction in exploring both the physical and the metaphysical. And while Newton was busy deciphering the end times, his legacy in the realm of physics was solidifying. His Principia Mathematica had laid the groundwork for classical mechanics, introducing the laws of motion that would propel humanity into the industrial age. The apple may have fallen, but Newton's theories had launched a trajectory that would see rockets reach space and Einstein rethink gravity itself. Newton's work was a cornerstone of modern physics, a testament to the power of human ingenuity to comprehend the unfathomable. Yet for all his accomplishments, Newton's later years were marked by solitude. He never married, and his friendships were few and far between, often strained by his demanding nature and penchant for argument. He lived with his niece, Catherine Barton, in London, where he spent his days juggling the affairs of the Royal Society, the Royal Mint, and his own theological inquiries. It was a life as structured and meticulous as one of his equations, but beneath it all was a man who never stopped asking questions, never ceased to wonder at the universe around him. Newton died in 1727 at the age of 84, a venerable age for the time and a testament to a life lived with remarkable intensity. He was buried with the pomp befitting a national hero in Westminster Abbey, surrounded by the great and the good. But even in death, Newton's influence was just beginning to be felt. His ideas continued to echo through the corridors of time, shaping the scientific discourse for centuries to come. So, what do we make of Isaac Newton, this towering figure who reshaped our understanding of reality? He was a man of contradictions, a solitary genius who sought to illuminate the darkest corners of knowledge. His legacy is as multifaceted as his mind, encompassing the rigorous precision of mathematics, the philosophical depths of theology, and the relentless pursuit of truth that defined his life. In the end, Newton was more than the sum of his equations. He was a man who dared to dream beyond the constraints of his time, whose curiosity knew no bounds. His life was a testament to the power of intellectual curiosity, to transcend the mundane, to find wonder in the workings of the universe, and to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Newton may have passed into history, but his legacy lives on, a shining beacon for all who seek to understand the world and their place within it. If you've ever thought your foodie friends were over the top, let me introduce you to the ancient Etruscans. These folks were the ultimate OG foodies, living it up in what's now modern-day Italy, long before pasta became a national treasure. Nestled between the Tiber and Arno rivers, the Etruscans flourished around 900 BC to the 1st century BC, creating a civilization that was as much about feasting as it was about fighting. Think Tuscany, but with more togas and fewer tourists. Archaeological digs have unearthed a veritable buffet of evidence that these people loved a good party. Tombs, you see, were not just places for eternal rest, but also everlasting dinner parties. Elaborate paintings cover the walls of Etruscan burial sites, depicting scenes of banquets and merrymaking. Imagine frescoes that showcase servants pouring wine, musicians strumming lyres, and guests lounging on couches like it's the world's longest episode of Come Dine With Me. Now, don't let the term tomb paintings lull you into thinking these were sombre affairs. Oh no, these were celebrations of life in all its indulgent, wine-soaked glory. The Etruscans believed that the afterlife was a continuation of earthly pleasures, which, let's be honest, sounds like they had their priorities straight. Their tombs are like the Instagram feeds of the ancient world, proudly displaying their love for food and festivity. Artifacts from this era tell us that the Etruscans didn't just slap together a charcuterie board and call it a night. No, they were the original culinary influences. There are bronze utensils, intricately decorated pottery, and even remnants of banquet furniture that suggest these folks took dining very seriously. If there had been Michelin stars back then, the Etruscans would have been all over them like truffles on risotto. But why were these Etruscans so obsessed with elaborate dinners? Well, for one, food was a powerful status symbol, much like today, where posting a photo of your avocado toast somehow equates to social currency. The Etruscans used feasting to flaunt their wealth and sophistication. Hosting a lavish spread was a way to demonstrate power and prestige. If you could afford exotic ingredients and entertain scores of guests, you were clearly someone to be reckoned with. Their feasting habits also had a social and political dimension. These banquets were where deals were made, alliances were forged, and power dynamics were played out. They were the ancient Italian version of a power lunch, only with more wine and fewer briefcases. In a society where oral tradition was vital, these gatherings were perfect venues for storytelling and passing on cultural narratives. Now, let's sprinkle a dash of humour on this history salad. Picture your modern-day food bloggers snapping pictures of their meals and hashtagging foodie goals. The Etruscans were doing the same, albeit without the smartphones. Their version of food porn was etched into stone and painted onto walls, a testament to their culinary creativity and love for life's indulgences. It's like they said, why just live life when you can dine it? Despite their reputation as party enthusiasts, the Etruscans were not just about gluttony. They played a significant role in the cultural and political development of the region. They were masterful traders, skilled in metalwork, and had a complex society that influenced their more famous neighbours, the Romans. In fact, much of what we consider Roman culture was borrowed or outright stolen from the Etruscans, a little culture of appropriation before it was cool. But back to the feasting. These events were not just about showing off. They were deeply rooted in religious and cultural traditions. The Etruscans believed in appeasing the gods with grand gestures, and what better way than through a sumptuous feast? Sacrifices and offerings were made, with the gods invited to partake in the festivities. It was a divine dinner party, where the guest list included both mortals and immortals. And while we're on the subject, let's debunk the myth that the Etruscans were simply a footnote in history. While they may have been overshadowed by the Romans in the long run, their impact was substantial. Their language, although not fully deciphered, has left tantalizing clues about their rich culture, and their architectural innovations, such as the arch, were pivotal in shaping future civilizations. So, the next time you're at a dinner party and someone starts waxing poetic about the latest food fad, you can channel your inner Etruscan and remind them that extravagant feasting is nothing new. These ancient Italians were dining divas long before food trucks and fusion cuisine became all the rage. Their legacy? A testament to the idea that life is fleeting, but a good meal can make it feel eternal. While the Etruscans were all about living and dining large, these feasts were no casual backyard BBQs. We're talking high-stakes soirees that would put any modern gala to shame. Forget about a simple RSVP. Hosting an Etruscan feast was akin to running a small kingdom for a night. The hosts, typically the upper crust of Etruscan society, were the culinary kings and queens who wielded their influence through the power of the plate. The centerpiece of these gatherings was the banqueting hall, often the most lavish room in an Etruscan home, decked out like a palace. Picture long, low tables laden with a dizzying array of dishes, each one a testament to the host's wealth and connections. It wasn't just about quantity, but quality. Exotic ingredients were the name of the game. If you could serve up a dish that included imported spices from the far reaches of the Mediterranean, you were the Jeff Bezos of the banquet scene. But let's not forget the guests, the true connoisseurs, and often the power brokers in this ancient dinner drama. Attendance was by invitation only, and the guest list was curated with the precision of a modern-day influencer's social media feed. The mix of elites present wasn't just to fill the room, but to create a tapestry of alliances, potential business deals, and social climbing opportunities. It was like LinkedIn, but with better food and more wine. Now, you may wonder about the practicalities, like the cost of throwing such a massive shindig. Well, in today's terms, it was a financial splurge that could rival a celebrity wedding. The expense was staggering, with some feasts costing the equivalent of a year's salary for the average Etruscan labourer. But in a society where social capital was as valuable as gold, it was an investment in one's status and future. The right banquet could elevate a family's standing for generations, making it a gamble worth taking. But here's where the plot thickens, like a rich Etruscan stew. These feasts weren't just about food and fun. They were deeply embedded in the social and political fabric of Etruscan life. Much like today's political fundraisers or high-powered networking events, these gatherings were where the real deals got done. Land transactions, marriage negotiations, and alliances were often solidified over the clinking of bronze cups and the sharing of a particularly well-roasted boar. And let's talk about the social hierarchy on display at these events. The seating arrangement was a subtle yet powerful indicator of one's place in the Etruscan pecking order. The most esteemed guests lounged closest to the host, enjoying the choicest morsels and the first pour from the wine amphorae. Further down the line, you'd find those less influential, perhaps hoping to curry favour or catch a whiff of the political winds. It was the original power table, long before Vanity Fair made it a thing. In the midst of all this opulence, the economic implications were as vast as the spread itself. The Etruscans were nothing if not savvy, understanding that a feast could serve as both a display of personal wealth and a community investment. The food industry, yes, even back then, was a significant economic driver. From farmers and fishermen to artisans crafting exquisite servingware, the ripple effect of a single feast could be felt throughout the region. It was a culinary trickle-down economy, where everyone got a slice of the pie, albeit some slices were decidedly more sumptuous than others. Let's not gloss over the fact that these feasts required an army of workers, literally. The preparation was a Herculean task, demanding the skills of cooks, servants, musicians, and entertainers. It was the equivalent of hosting the Oscars, complete with the backstage chaos and last-minute drama. And while the guests reclined on their couches soaking up the ambience, the workers toiled away, ensuring everything ran smoother than a freshly pressed toga. But beneath the glamour and gluttony, there was a harsh reality. These feasts were a double-edged sword. The pressure to outperform previous gatherings was immense, and not everyone could handle the constant demand for more, bigger, better. Just like today's extravagant weddings can lead to financial ruin, some Etruscan hosts found themselves teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, their fortunes consumed faster than the Banquets' roast lamb. In the grand tapestry of history, Etruscan feasts might seem like just another footnote, but they reveal much about human nature. Our desire to connect, to impress, and to indulge is as ancient as civilization itself. So, next time you're invited to an over-the-top event, remember, the Etruscans were throwing down epic meals before brunch was even a thing. With each bite, they were crafting a legacy, one extravagant dish at a time. And though they might not have known it, they were setting the stage for centuries of culinary traditions to come. So, in the grand symphony of history, Etruscan feasts were the crescendo of culinary excess. But to truly appreciate the depth of their gastronomic genius, let's dive into the dishes that made these gatherings legendary. Forget your run-of-the-mill Roman fare. The Etruscans were dishing out delicacies that would make today's Michelin-starred chefs sit up and take notes. First, picture a table groaning under the weight of roasted meats. These weren't your average Sunday roast chickens. We're talking wild boar, venison, and lamb, seasoned with herbs like rosemary and thyme flavors that scream Tuscany, before Tuscany was even a thing. The Etruscans were early adopters of the farm-to-table movement, raising livestock like pigs and sheep in lush pastures that stretched across the Etrurian countryside. Their agricultural prowess didn't stop there. They grew grains, olives, and grapes, turning them into staples like bread, olive oil, and wine, the holy trinity of Mediterranean cuisine. Speaking of wine, the Etruscans were no strangers to a good vintage. Their vineyards produced a range of wines, from everyday table varieties to the kind of robust reds that would make a sommelier swoon. And let's not forget their mastery over fermentation, which was so advanced that they even exported their wines across the Mediterranean. Etruscan amphorae have been found as far afield as France and Spain, proving that their vino had an international fan club. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. There's a romantic notion that the Etruscans dined solely on exotic imports, but the truth is, they were savvy traders who knew the value of a good barter. Sure, they enjoyed spices from afar, cinnamon from Ceylon and pepper from India, but these were luxury items reserved for feasts that demanded a touch of opulence. The real magic lay in their local produce, figs, apples, and honey that added sweetness to their dishes without a hint of artificial anything. If the Etruscans had a motto, it might have been, go local but think global. Let's take a moment to appreciate their culinary creativity. Imagine a dish of peacock, its iridescent feathers used as a garnish, or a savory pie filled with dormice. A delicacy that might not make it into today's cookbooks, but was the height of sophistication back then. The Etruscans didn't just cook food, they crafted experiences. Each dish was a performance, a sensory overload designed to impress. But what about the humble ingredient that's now a darling of paleo enthusiasts everywhere? Yes, I'm talking about nuts, seeds, and legumes. The Etruscans were chomping on chickpeas and lentils long before they were trendy. Their diet was rich in these plant-based proteins, which they cleverly combined with meats and vegetables to create balanced meals. In a twist of irony, The very foods some modern folks embrace as ancient superfoods were just Tuesday night dinner for the Etruscans. Their culinary network wasn't just limited to what they could grow or hunt. Thanks to their strategic location near the coast, they had access to a bounty of seafood. From fresh fish to shellfish, their menus featured a marine medley that would make any seafood lover drool. With the Tyrrhenian Sea practically on their doorstep, they incorporated everything from octopus to sea bass, showcasing their knack for using what nature provided. Trading routes were the lifelines of Etruscan feasts, allowing them to acquire exotic ingredients that made their banquets the stuff of legend. They traded with the Greeks, Phoenicians, and even their future conquerors, the Romans. This exchange wasn't just about food, it was a cultural fusion, blending flavors and techniques to create a cuisine that was uniquely Etruscan. Let's not forget the drinks that flowed as freely as the conversations. Beyond wine, there was Mulsima honeyed wine that added a sweet twist to their drinking repertoire. Imagine the scene. Guests lounging on couches, sipping Mulsum from ornate bronze cups, as they engaged in philosophical debates or plotted their next political maneuver. It was a heady mix of indulgence and intellect, the kind of atmosphere that could spark revolutions or romances. And while we're talking drinks, let's tip our hats to the Etruscan love for communal dining. Their banquets were all about shared experiences, where dishes were passed around and stories swapped. It was less about individual plates and more about communal platters, a practice that would feel right at home in today's tapas bars. But here's where the Etruscans really outdid themselves. They didn't just eat and drink, they celebrated. Music, dancing, and entertainment were as much a part of the feast as the food itself. Musicians played the aulos, a double-reeded instrument, providing a soundtrack for the evening that was both lively and melodic. Dancers added a visual spectacle, their movements as intricate as the tapestries that adorned the banquet halls. It was a sensory smorgasbord, a feast for the eyes and ears as much as for the stomach. And, of course, there were the games. No Etruscan feast was complete without a bit of friendly competition, whether it was board games or athletic contests. The Etruscans understood that a little rivalry could spice up any gathering, turning a simple meal into an event to remember. Now, as we revel in this culinary retrospective, it's worth pondering the economic machine that made it all possible. The Etruscans were not just master chefs, but master economists. Their agricultural practices were advanced, utilizing crop rotation and irrigation to maximize yields. They understood the importance of sustainable farming, ensuring that their lands remained fertile for generations. It was an agrarian efficiency that underpinned their entire society, fueling the feasts that were the pinnacle of their cultural expression. In the grand scheme of things, Etruscan feasts were more than just meals, they were microcosms of their world. They reflected a society that valued community, celebrated diversity, and understood the power of a shared meal. Through their culinary legacy, we glimpse the heart of a civilization that, though overshadowed by Rome, left an indelible mark on history's palate. So, the next time you're nibbling on a charcuterie board or sipping a glass of Chianti, raise a toast to the Etruscans. They were the original epicures, the culinary trailblazers who knew that life's fleeting pleasures are best savoured with friends, good food, and a splash of wine. And while we may never fully decode their language, we can certainly appreciate their universal message: dine well, live well, and let the feasts of today become the legends of tomorrow. Now, while you're raising that toast to the Etruscans, let's not forget that these feasts weren't just about indulging the senses or sealing business deals. They were also a divine hotline to the gods, complete with celestial offerings and a bit of mystical forecasting. Think of it as ancient Italy's take on a cosmic conference call, with sacrifices and divination as the main agenda items. First up, offerings. The Etruscans didn't skimp when it came to appeasing their deities. You see, they believed that the gods had quite the appetite and needed to be kept well fed to ensure their favour. So, part of the feast was dedicated to them, with choice morsels set aside as offerings. This wasn't just about dropping a drumstick on the altar and calling it a day. Oh no, these offerings were as meticulously curated as the rest of the feast, featuring the finest cuts of meat, the freshest fruits, and the choicest wines. If you're picturing the gods reclining on clouds, sipping divine cocktails, you're not far off. But let's debunk a myth here. While it's tempting to imagine the Etruscans as mystical hippies, serenading their deities with offerings and incense, the truth is a bit more grounded. These religious rituals were as much about social order and political control as they were about spirituality. By hosting these grand feasts and performing the rituals, the elite reinforced their status as intermediaries between the gods and the people. It was a divine endorsement, a celestial thumbs up that kept them at the top of the social ladder. Now, on to the main event, divination. If you think fortune cookies hold the secrets of the universe, then you're in for a treat. The Etruscans took divination to a whole new level, treating it as both an art and a science. They were the original fortune tellers, the Nostradamuses of their day, using everything from the flight patterns of birds to the entrails of sacrificial animals to predict the future. And let's face it, nothing says party entertainment quite like reading the liver of a freshly sacrificed sheep. This practice, known as haruspicy, was no amateur gig. Haruspices, the priests skilled in this art, were highly respected and wielded significant influence. They could interpret the will of the gods, offering insights that could sway political decisions or military strategies. It was like having a hotline to the heavens, but instead of dialing in, you'd dissect a goat. And while this might sound a bit gruesome, it was a serious business. The Etruscans believed that the gods communicated through signs, and it was up to the haruspices to decode these messages. In a world where uncertainty was as common as a bad hair day, having a celestial cheat sheet was invaluable. Let's take a moment to consider the economic implications of this divine consultancy. Haruspices could command hefty fees for their services, making divination a lucrative trade. In a society where social and political decisions often hinged on the interpretation of omens, these priests held a power that was both spiritual and financial. They were the ancient world's version of high-powered consultants, with the added bonus of divine backing. But here's where the Etruscans really set themselves apart. Unlike their Roman successors, who often saw divination as a mere formality, the Etruscans genuinely believed in its power. This wasn't just a ritualistic box-ticking exercise, it was a fundamental part of their world-view. They saw the universe as a complex web of divine forces, with every event and action interconnected. By understanding these connections, they believed they could navigate the uncertainties of life with greater confidence. It was a worldview that blended spirituality with practicality, faith with foresight. Now, if you're thinking this sounds a bit like modern-day astrology or tarot card readings, you're not entirely wrong. The Etruscans were the OG mystics, using their rituals and divination practices to connect with something greater than themselves. But let's not get too romantic. While there's a certain allure to the idea of ancient seers gazing into the future, the reality was often more pragmatic. These practices were deeply woven into the fabric of Etruscan society, serving both religious and political purposes. They were a means of maintaining order, reinforcing hierarchies, and legitimizing power. And while we're debunking myths, let's address the misconception that the Etruscans were a mysterious, mystical people isolated from the rest of the ancient world. Far from it. They were skilled traders and diplomats, actively engaging with neighboring cultures. Their religious practices and belief systems were influenced by, and in turn influenced, those of their Greek and Roman neighbors. It was a cultural exchange that enriched their spirituality and added layers of complexity to their rituals. They weren't just borrowing ideas, they were creating a unique spiritual tapestry that reflected their identity and worldview. But let's bring this back to the feasts. These gatherings weren't just about filling bellies and making deals, they were a microcosm of Etruscan society, a reflection of their values, beliefs, and aspirations. Through the rituals and offerings, they sought to bridge the gap between the mortal and divine, to create a sense of community and continuity in an ever-changing world. It was a celebration of life and a recognition of the forces that shaped it. In the grand scheme of things, the Etruscans remind us that while the specifics of our rituals and beliefs may have changed, the underlying human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves remains constant. Whether it's through a lavish feast or a quiet moment of reflection, we're all seeking meaning and understanding in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. So, as we continue to explore the world of the Etruscans, remember that their feasts were more than just culinary extravaganzas. They were a testament to the human spirit, a celebration of life's pleasures, and a reminder that in the dance between the earthly and the divine, we find the essence of our humanity. And while their language may remain a mystery, their legacy speaks to us in a universal language of food, faith, and festivity. Stay tuned as we unravel more about this fascinating civilization and their enduring impact on the world we know today. As we meander through the twilight of Etruscan opulence, it's time to face the music, or in their case, the dulcet tones of an Orlos fading into silence. You see, the Etruscans didn't just vanish overnight like some ancient Cinderella at the stroke of midnight. Their decline was more like a slow, wine-soaked waltz into the annals of history, a dance with destiny that saw them absorbed by the very culture they helped shape, the Romans. Now, don't let the cinematic allure of their feasting fool you. While the Etruscans were busy hosting the Mediterranean's most exclusive dinner parties, the Romans were sharpening their swords and their ambitions. By the 4th century BC, the Romans started muscling in on Etruscan territory, like the new kid at school who's both annoyingly charming and devastatingly effective. The Etruscans, once the life of the Italian party, found themselves outmaneuvered on the political dance floor, their city-states falling one by one like a row of amphorae in a poorly orchestrated game of dominoes. But here's the twist in this culinary tale. The Romans didn't just conquer the Etruscans, they digested them, absorbing their cultural DNA like a well-prepared dish. Much of what we consider quintessentially Roman, from religious rituals to architectural innovations, was actually borrowed, or let's be honest, outright pilfered from the Etruscans. The Roman penchant for grand banquets, those infamous orgies of gluttony and gossip, you can thank the Etruscans for that blueprint. The Etruscan influence on Roman feasting was profound, a fact as hard to ignore as a toga party in full swing. Take the reclining dining style, for instance. The Romans embraced this Etruscan tradition with gusto, turning mealtime into a languid affair that was as much about status and spectacle as satiation. The very concept of a convivium, a social gathering centered around food and drink, was rooted in Etruscan customs. The Romans took this idea and ran with it, adding their own flair of decadence, turning every meal into a potential political theatre, complete with alliances forged over fish sauce and fortunes decided between courses. Let's not forget the economic underpinnings of this cultural exchange. With the Roman appetite for expansion came an equally voracious demand for luxury goods, many of which had Etruscan origins. The Etruscan expertise in metallurgy, especially their bronze work, was co-opted into the Roman economy, fueling not just the art of war, but the art of dining. Those exquisite bronze utensils and intricate servingware, they became symbols of Roman opulence, a testament to a civilization that knew how to feast like there was no tomorrow, which, given their penchant for empire building, was probably a prudent approach. But here's where we have to puncture the romantic bubble. While it's tempting to view the Roman adoption of Etruscan customs as a seamless cultural handover, the reality was far less poetic. The Etruscans didn't just fade into the background, they were systematically assimilated, their identity diluted in the Roman melting pot. It was a process as brutal as it was inevitable, a historical inevitability that saw Etruscan language and traditions slowly eroded by the juggernaut of Romanization. Yet, in this grand narrative of conquest and cultural exchange, there's a poignant irony at play. The very feasting traditions that epitomized Etruscan society became the vehicle through which their legacy lived on. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, recognized the value of Etruscan culinary sophistication and religious rituals, integrating them into their own burgeoning culture. It was a culinary and cultural osmosis, a legacy that endures in the very essence of what we now call Italian heritage. So, what's the takeaway from this ancient Epicurean odyssey? It's a tale as old as time, one that reminds us that cultural legacies are rarely straightforward. They are a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy, innovation and assimilation. The Etruscans, with their lavish feasts and rich traditions, left behind a legacy that was as much about the art of living as it was about the inevitability of change. Their story teaches us that while civilizations may rise and fall, the echoes of their existence linger on, like the lingering notes of an ancient lyre played softly in the corridors of time. In the end, the Etruscans were both the architects of their own opulent lifestyle and the unwitting curators of a cultural heritage that would outlive them, passed down through the ages like a treasured family recipe. As we savor the flavors of history, Let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Etruscans, the unsung epicures who knew that life's fleeting pleasures are best celebrated with a feast, a friend, and a legacy that resonates far beyond the last course. The scene is set in the bustling heart of the Indus Valley, around 2500 BCE, where the air is thick with the scent of spices and the clamour of traders. But let's zoom in a bit, because today we're diving into the vibrant world of ancient Indian dyeing, a craft so colourful it would make a peacock envious. Now, here's a nugget to start with. Imagine a time when your clothes didn't just show off your fashion sense, but also screamed your social status and even your trading connections across the known world. Forget Instagram likes. This was the OG influencer status. In this era, the folks of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro weren't just slapping colours onto their garments for fun. Oh no, they were pioneering something spectacular with their use of natural dyes. Evidence of madder, indigo, and turmeric. Each a botanical treasure trove has been found in archaeological digs, revealing the secrets of their colourful legacy. And get this, some of these dyeing techniques are still being used today. Talk about a trend with staying power. Let's talk resources. The Indus Valley civilization had a knack for making the most out of what Mother Nature handed them. Indigo, for instance, was derived from the indigofera plant, a staple of the Indian subcontinent. This wasn't just a pretty blue. It was the kind of blue that could send a message like, "I'm important," or "I have connections." You see, back then, certain colours were reserved for the elite. Wearing indigo, a dye so revered it later sparked trade routes across the globe, was akin to wearing the crown jewels on your chest. Now, don't go thinking these ancient dye masters had it easy. The process of creating dyes was about as straightforward as quantum physics. It involved a lot of trial, error, and probably a few choice words. The indigo dyeing process, for instance, required fermenting the leaves in a stew of alkaline water and ash. The result? A dye that could last longer than some marriages. And while the process might sound like a chemistry set for the particularly ambitious, the payoff was massive, vibrant fabrics that could withstand the test of time and the scrutiny of the upper crust. But let's not paint too rosy a picture here. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about economics and social clout. The Indus Valley's knack for dyeing didn't just make them style icons, it made them power players in the ancient world. Their textiles were traded far and wide, reaching the shores of Mesopotamia and beyond, turning them into a sort of ancient-day Milan. The dyeing industry was a cornerstone of economic activity, and those who controlled it weren't just artisans, they were entrepreneurs navigating a complex market. Here's where the plot thickens. The use of dyes wasn't just a matter of economic necessity or artistic expression. It was a statement of power, a tool of social stratification. In this society, what you wore was a billboard of your position in the social hierarchy. Those at the top? They wore the vibrant, labour-intensive colours. If you were caught dead in anything less, well, you might as well have been announcing your last-place finish in the race of life. But let's not romanticize this too much. The truth is, these vibrant colours often came at a cost. Not just of time and resources, but of labour, often under the harshest conditions. The dyeing processes were laborious, requiring a workforce that was both skilled and expendable. It's easy to forget the hands that created these masterpieces when gazing at the end product, but behind every bolt of cloth was an economy built on the backs of many. So, why does any of this matter? Well, unravelling the story of dyeing in ancient India isn't just about pretty colours and exotic fabrics. It's about understanding a civilization that was as complex as it was colourful. The techniques they developed didn't just stain fabric, they left an indelible mark on history, influencing trade, economics, and social structures for millennia. The Romans, the Greeks, and later the entire Western world would become enamoured with these vibrant colours, sparking a global trade network that changed the course of history. In the end, the story of ancient Indian dyeing is more than a tale of colourful threads. It's a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of a civilization that, through its mastery of nature, managed to weave a tapestry of influence that stretched far beyond its borders. And as we continue to peel back the layers of this vibrant past, we find that the world of ancient dyes is anything but black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of history, one that reminds us how the colours of yesterday continue to influence the shades of today. While the Indus Valley set the stage, the real drama of ancient Indian dyeing techniques burst into full technicolor during the Mauryan and Gupta empires. Cue the years 3021 BCE to 530 CE, a time when political stability and economic prosperity fueled the textile industry like a caffeine shot to an overworked grad student. Imagine an era when the economy wasn't a roller coaster but a steady ride, and the only recessions were in your favourite toga. The Mauryan and Gupta periods were the golden eras for the arts, and let me tell you, the dyeing industry was riding that wave all the way to the bank. Here's the lowdown. During these empires, textile production wasn't just a side hustle, it was a full-blown industry. And why not? When you've got an empire that stretches from Iran to the Bay of Bengal, you need something to keep the masses clothed and the coffers clinking. Enter the guilds, the unsung heroes of the textile world. Picture them as the corporate giants of their time, but with fewer scandals and more loom-based ambition. These guilds weren't just about weaving cloth, they were the medieval equivalent of tech startups, driving innovation and setting standards that would influence the globe. You see, these guilds were powerhouses of production and social organization. They had rules, regulations, and most importantly, a monopoly on skill. Want to dye that tunic in the latest shade of Gupta-approved green? You'd better have guild approval or you're out of luck, buddy. And guilds weren't just about business, they were social institutions too. Members shared everything from trade secrets to a communal potluck. They even had the ancient version of health insurance, albeit with more turmeric and fewer dental plans. But let's talk numbers. It's estimated that textiles comprised up to 30% of the trade during these empires. That's right, 1/3 of the economy wrapped up in fabric, literally. And why not? Indian textiles were the Rolex of the ancient world, a status symbol that stretched from Roman senators to Chinese merchants. When Pliny the Elder, that Roman know-it-all, complained about the empire's trade deficit with India, he wasn't just whining about spices, he was alluding to the textile trade that was bleeding Roman coffers dry. Indian fabrics were that irresistible. Now, speaking of irresistible, let's wander into the realm of dyes. These weren't just any dyes, they were the stuff of legend and luxury. Colour wasn't just a preference, it was a proclamation of power. Back then, wearing the right colour was as essential as owning the latest iPhone today. Want to show off your wealth? Forget the jewels, wear a sari dyed in the rarest shade of red. The dyeing process itself was an elaborate dance of chemistry and artistry, involving plants like madder for red and saffron for yellow, each requiring a complex extraction process that made alchemy look like child's play. But don't let the romance of these dyes blind you to the grit behind the glamour. Sure, the finished product was a masterpiece, but the road to that vibrant fabric was paved with labour-intensive processes and, let's be honest, a fair amount of exploitation. The dye workers, often overlooked in the grand tapestry of history, were the backbone of this industry. They toiled away in conditions as colourful as the dyes themselves, if by colourful you mean backbreaking and relentless. However, let's not forget the lavish lifestyles that these textiles afforded. Picture the elite of the Gupta Empire, lounging in their opulent palaces, draped in the finest silks and cottons, their garments dyed in shades so vibrant they'd make a rainbow blush. These colours were more than just eye-catching, they were social markers, a way to distinguish the haves from the have-nots. And while the lower classes might have worn simpler hues, the elite were practically swimming in a sea of colour that rivaled a holly festival. Yet, with all this opulence, it was hard not to notice the irony. The very symbols of luxury and status were often made by those who had neither. It's a tale as old as time, the rich getting richer off the labour of the many. But hey, at least they had nice clothes, right? The allure of these textiles spurred trade routes that stretched across continents, transforming simple pieces of cloth into conduits of culture and commerce. The Silk Road wasn't just about silk, it was a highway of hues, a vibrant connection between East and West, where Indian textiles were the gold standard. As we unravel the threads of this vibrant past, it's clear that the Mauryan and Gupta empires set the stage for a textile revolution that coloured the world's history in more ways than one. This wasn't just an industry, it was an economic powerhouse, a cultural phenomenon and a social statement, all woven into a single piece of cloth. So next time you look at that colourful scarf or vibrant dress, Remember, you're not just wearing fabric, you're wearing history. And the best part? This story's far from over. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more twists, turns, and hues to explore in the colourful saga of ancient Indian textiles. And just when you thought the saga of ancient Indian textiles couldn't get any more vibrant, enter stage left, the medieval period, where things really start to get interesting. As if the colourful legacy of the Mauryan and Gupta empires wasn't enough, the Silk Road and Arab traders decided to throw a few more hues into the historical palette. Now, let's talk about the new kids on the block, indigo and madder. They didn't just stroll in, they arrived with a fanfare, transforming the dying landscape in ways that would make even the most jaded historians sit up and take notice. This era marked a time when trade was the buzzword, and the Silk Road was the ancient world's equivalent of a global superhighway. Picture merchants from as far as China and the Arab world exchanging goods, ideas, and yes, dyes. This wasn't your average flea market. This was the elite bazaar of the ancient world. As these traders swapped silk for spices and spices for silver, they also exchanged knowledge about dyeing techniques that would diversify and enrich the Indian textile tradition. Let's start with indigo, the dye that had already made quite the splash in ancient times, but now was set to become the darling of medieval Europe. It was the blue that launched 1,000 ships, or at least a good few trade caravans. By the time the Arab traders got their hands on it, indigo had become the denim of its day, an essential staple that everyone wanted a piece of. But here's the real kicker. While everyone else was dreaming of blue, the Indian subcontinent was perfecting its production, turning out shades that would make the Mediterranean Sea blush with envy. And then there's madder, the red dye that would have made even the most vibrant sunset look pale by comparison. Introduced through trade, madder added a whole new dimension to the Indian colour spectrum. It wasn't just about having another colour in the toolbox. It was about creating a red so rich it practically dripped with opulence. The process of extracting dye from the madder root was no walk in the park. It required patience, skill, and a fair bit of labour. But the results were worth it, producing a hue that was both eye-catching and heart-stopping. Yet, as with all things that seem too good to be true, there's a darker side to this colourful story. Let's debunk some myths, shall we? First off, the notion that these dyes were exclusively glamorous is as misleading as a mirage in the desert. While the finished textiles were dazzling, the production was anything but. Harvesting and processing indigo, for example, was a back-breaking affair. The plants had to be cultivated with precision, then soaked, fermented, and oxidized in a process that could leave workers blue in more ways than one. And madder? It required digging up roots, drying them, and then painstakingly extracting the dye, a process that left many hands rough and stained. Yet despite these gritty realities, the allure of these dyes was undeniable. They became symbols of prestige and power, a testament to the economic and cultural clout of societies that could afford to produce and wear them. For medieval Indian merchants, the textile trade wasn't just about selling fabric, it was about exporting a piece of their civilization. These dyes were the silent diplomats, crossing borders and building bridges long before anyone thought of signing treaties. And let's not forget the economic impact. Textiles laden with these vibrant dyes were a cornerstone of medieval trade. They were shipped to markets as distant as Rome and Baghdad, making Indian merchants the Jeff Bezos of their time. The spices might have been hot, but it was the textiles that were the real moneymakers. The demand was insatiable, fueling an economy that stretched from the Arabian Sea to the farthest reaches of Europe. But the real genius here wasn't just in making the dye, it was in marketing it. Indian traders were the original branding maestros. They didn't just sell fabric, they sold a lifestyle, a story woven into every thread. The colours weren't just about aesthetics, they were about identity, a way to announce your status without saying a word. In a world without Instagram, a pop of indigo or a splash of madder was all you needed to make a statement. Yet, with all the romance about vibrant colours crossing continents, let's not forget the human cost. Behind every bolt of dyed fabric was a battalion of workers toiling in the shadows. The dyeing industry was a labour-intensive enterprise, and those who worked the vats and looms were often caught in a cycle of hard work and low wages. The elite might have donned the colours with pride, but it was the labourers who paid the price, their toil hidden beneath the rich hues of the final product. So, as we continue to pull at the threads of this story, It's clear that the medieval period was a time of immense change and complexity. The dyes that coloured the world were not just products, they were symbols of cultural exchange, economic power, and social stratification. They tell a story of a world in flux, where trade routes were the arteries of civilization, pumping life and colour across continents. In the end, we find that the tale of medieval Indian dyeing is as rich and complex as the colours themselves. It's a story of innovation and exploitation, of beauty and brutality, all woven into the fabric of history. And just when you think you've unravelled the last thread, another twist awaits, ready to add yet another hue to this vibrant tapestry. So stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to delve even deeper into the colourful saga of ancient Indian textiles. And just when the vibrant tapestry of Indian dyeing seemed woven to perfection, enter the colonial powers with their knack for disruption and a proclivity for profit. Welcome to the age of empires and colonization, where European nations saw Indian textiles not just as beautiful artifacts, but as the crown jewels of economic opportunity. Spoiler alert, this was not a partnership made in heaven. More like a shotgun wedding where one side brought the gunpowder. Let's start with a little context. By the late 17th century, the British East India Company had transformed from a modest trading outfit into a juggernaut of economic ambition. Picture a corporate behemoth with the mindset of a pirate and the resources of an empire. They weren't just here to sample the local curry, they were here to dominate the trade, and textiles were the golden goose. Cotton, silk, indigo. If it could be spun, woven, or dyed, it was fair game. Now, here's where things get interesting. Before the British, Indian textiles were all the rage in Europe. We're talking about chintz and calico, fabrics so fashionable they practically started a cult. European aristocrats draped themselves in these vibrant pieces, oblivious to the fact that their sartorial splendour was woven by artisans who'd never see a penny of that profit. But back in India, a complex system of guilds and local markets ensured that textile production was both an art and a livelihood, a delicate balance that would soon be tipped by colonial interests. The British, with their penchant for efficiency, saw Indian textiles as both a threat and an opportunity. Why import when you can control? Their strategy? Undercut traditional industries and establish a monopoly. Cue the introduction of British textiles into the Indian market, with a kind of aggressive pricing that would make even the most cutthroat Amazon sale blush. By the mid-18th century, they were flooding the market with cheap British goods, choking local businesses like a stranglehold with a checkered cravat. Yet, the irony was rich. While they were undermining Indian producers at home back in Britain, the textile mills were humming to the tune of Indian-inspired designs. Industrialization had turned textile production into a mechanized marvel, and while British factories churned out miles of fabric, the designs were often plagiarized straight from Indian originals. It was like claiming to invent the wheel while driving a borrowed car. Let's talk numbers. By the 19th century, Indian textiles were a significant chunk of British imports, contributing to a burgeoning economy. But the real cost was borne by the Indian weavers and dyers, whose livelihoods were being dismantled piece by piece. Artisans who had once been the backbone of a thriving industry found themselves out of work, their skills devalued and their traditions sidelined. The British were playing a game of economic chess, and for the local weavers it often felt like checkmate. And then there's the matter of indigo, the dye that had coloured history in shades of blue, but was about to take on a darker hue. Under British rule, indigo plantations became a symbol of exploitation. The demand for the dye was insatiable, driven by European fashion that required the kind of vibrant blue only Indian indigo could provide. Yet the cultivation of indigo was anything but idyllic. Peasants were coerced into growing indigo instead of food crops, locked into contracts that resembled shackles more than agreements. The infamous Indigo Revolt of 1859 was a direct result of such exploitation, a protest against the oppressive conditions that left many farmers with little more than a blue-stained legacy. And yet, despite the chaos, the evolution of dyeing techniques under British rule wasn't entirely stagnant. Enter synthetic dyes, the new kids on the block, courtesy of European industrial advancements. By the late 19th century, synthetic dyes were beginning to trickle into the Indian market. They were cheaper easier to produce, and didn't rely on the painstaking processes of traditional dyeing. But while they offered a rainbow of possibilities, they also threatened to wash away centuries of artisanal expertise. It was a double-edged sword, the kind that cut both the cost and the cultural ties. The British industrial machine was relentless, yet the romantic notion of exotic dyes persisted in the European imagination. Indian textiles were still seen as treasures, but the true cost of that treasure was often obscured beneath layers of colonial economics. It was a tale as old as time, the allure of the exotic masking the exploitation beneath. But here's the kicker. Despite the economic stranglehold, Indian textiles remained resilient. Much like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the industry adapted, evolved, and continued to influence global fashion. The skills and techniques that had been honed over millennia didn't just vanish, they endured, sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly, always present in the tapestry of history. Even as British rule imposed new norms, the spirit of innovation persisted, a testament to the resilience of a culture that refused to be died out. And so, as we unravel this complex chapter of history, it's clear that the Age of Empires was a time of both destruction and creation. The colonial powers may have sought to rewrite the rules, but the legacy of Indian textiles was too vibrant to be penned in monochrome. This story isn't just about fabric and dyes, it's about the resilience of tradition in the face of transformation. And as we prepare to dive into the next part of this saga, remember, every thread has two sides, and the tale of Indian textiles is far from over. Stay tuned, because the most colourful stories are always the ones with the most layers. As we untangle the threads of history, it's clear that the legacy of Indian dyeing isn't just a footnote, it's a vibrant testament to the endurance of culture against the tides of change. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that the ancient art of dyeing has not only survived, but has woven itself into the global textile narrative in ways that would make those Indus Valley traders beam with pride. Let's dive into how these techniques have made their fashionable comeback, like vintage jeans at a hipster festival, and how they're now draped in the banner of sustainability. In the modern era, there's been a renaissance of sorts for natural dyes, a term that sounds like a delightful paradox in our synthetic saturated world. With the environmental consciousness of today's consumers, these dyes have become the eco-friendly darlings of the fashion industry. Gone are the days when natural dyes were the preserve of history books and museum pieces. Now, these vibrant hues are making a comeback, not just as a nod to nostalgia, but as a sustainable alternative to the chemical-laden dyes that have dominated since the Industrial Revolution. Take madder, for instance. Once upon a time, it was the red of choice for the elite and influential. Today, it's being cultivated anew, with organic farms in South India producing madder for both local artisans and international designers. The numbers are small compared to industrial dye production, but they speak volumes about a shift towards sustainable practices. In 2022, for instance, India exported over 600 metric tons of natural dyes, a figure that might sound minor in the grand scheme of things, but marks a significant revival in a world obsessed with fast fashion. And let's not forget indigo, the blue that never went out of style. This ancient dye is experiencing a renaissance, thanks largely to its eco-friendly credentials and the rise of slow fashion. Contemporary designers, both in India and abroad, are embracing indigo dyeing techniques that were perfected centuries ago, even as synthetic indigo remains the dominant player in the market. Yet, the charm of hand-dyed natural indigo is irresistible, its imperfections celebrated as a mark of authenticity and craftsmanship. It's a reminder that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when they come with a lower carbon footprint. But here's the real kicker. These traditional methods aren't just relics of the past, they're being adapted for the future. Artisans across India are blending ancient techniques with modern technology, creating textiles that are both a nod to history and a step towards innovation. In Rajasthan, artisans use digital tools to design block prints, which are then painstakingly dyed using traditional methods. It's a beautiful collision of past and present, proving that innovation can be as much about looking back as it is about looking forward. The appeal of these ancient techniques isn't just about sustainability, it's also about cultural pride. In a world where globalization often means homogenization, there's a renewed appreciation for the uniqueness of regional crafts. Indian designers like Anita Dongre and Rahul Mishra have championed traditional dyeing in their collections, showcasing them on global runways and proving that these techniques can hold their own amidst haute couture. It's a powerful statement. These aren't just clothes, they're cultural narratives woven into fabric, each piece telling a story of identity and heritage. And while the resurgence of natural dyes is a promising trend, it's important to remember the artisans behind the art. For them, this isn't just a fashion statement, it's a livelihood. In recent years, initiatives like the Khadi and Village Industries Commission have worked to support these artisans, ensuring that the revival of traditional dyeing techniques translates into economic empowerment. In 2023, over 2,000 artisans were directly employed in the production of natural dyes, a number that's steadily growing as demand increases. So, what does all this mean for the global textile industry? Well, it's a reminder that the past is never truly past, it's woven into the fabric of the present. The techniques developed thousands of years ago in the Indus Valley have left an indelible mark on the world, influencing everything from the clothes we wear to the way we think about sustainability and heritage. It's a testament to the resilience of tradition and the power of innovation, proving that the most vibrant stories are those that continue to unfold. In conclusion, the legacy of ancient Indian dyeing techniques isn't just a colourful chapter in history, it's a living, breathing narrative that continues to shape our world. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with fashion and the environment, to see clothes not just as commodities but as canvases of culture and creativity. The ancient art of dyeing, with its roots in the bustling markets of Harappa and the guilds of the Gupta Empire, has come full circle, reminding us that while fashion trends may come and go, the true classics are timeless. So next time you find yourself admiring a richly dyed fabric, remember, you're not just looking at a piece of cloth, you're gazing into a kaleidoscope of history, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And as we wrap up this colourful journey, let's carry forward the lessons of the past, ensuring that these ancient arts continue to inspire and innovate in the years to come. After all, the story of Indian textiles is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be even more vibrant than the last. You wake up to the crisp air of ancient Britain, where the morning doesn't start with a cup of coffee, but rather with a sacred ritual that's been the backbone of community life for centuries. As a Druid priest in the 3rd century, your day kicks off with the kind of spiritual fervour that makes today's yoga class look like a quick stretch. The sun might be just peeking over the hills, but you're already deep into your morning routine, which blends the mystical and the mundane in a way that even the most dedicated multitasker would envy. Let's start with the basics, your attire. Forget about robes dripping with gold or elaborate crowns. That's more Hollywood than history. You're likely wearing a tunic made from wool, dyed with natural plants, possibly woad for a blue hue. Practical and warm. Because, let's face it, British weather hasn't changed much in 2 millennia. Your first duty is to greet the day with a ritual at the sacred grove, those hallowed green spaces that serve as your temple. Here, you're not just a priest, you're an interpreter of nature's whispers, a mediator between the earthly and the divine. Rituals are your bread and butter, quite literally. They're not just about mumbling incantations into the wind, they have real, tangible effects on the community. You're ensuring good harvests, healthy livestock, and maybe even warding off a Roman incursion or two, because nothing says, "we come in peace," like a legion of soldiers. These rituals are no small affair. They involve precise timing, specific offerings, and a whole lot of chanting. And yes, you might even sacrifice a small animal, since spirituality and practicality often collide in ways modern sensibilities might find a tad unsettling. Now, let's dispel some myths. While the modern image of Druids might conjure thoughts of mystical bearded men in white robes chanting under full moons. Thank Merlin for that. The reality is a bit more mundane. Druids were the intellectual elite, the walking Wikipedias of their time. You're a priest, but also a judge, a healer, and a teacher. Your status is a curious blend of reverence and fear, with a touch of political power. You don't just predict the future, you help shape it, advising tribal chieftains who value your wisdom and fear your curses. Economically speaking, Druids are the glue holding the tribe together. The community sustains you because you sustain them with knowledge and spiritual guidance. Your economic reality involves a lot of bartering. You might bless a farmer's crops in exchange for some of the yield, or heal a warrior's wound for the promise of protection. You're not rolling in wealth, but your needs are met, which is a pretty sweet deal when the alternative is subsistence farming. Your connection to nature isn't just philosophical, it's practical. You're reading the patterns of the seasons, the behavior of animals, and the growth of plants for signs and omens. If it rains a lot, you're not just annoyed, you're predicting floods and advising on crop choices. The oak, your sacred tree, isn't just a symbol of strength, it's a living library of knowledge, and its acorns might just tell you more than any scroll could. Speaking of scrolls, let's talk literacy. Druids are known to be literate, but they're not hoarding books like a dragon with gold. Much of your knowledge is oral, passed down through generations with a kind of memorization skills that would make a modern-day actor weep. There's a reason why Druids didn't write things down. It's all about the power of memory and tradition, which is a bit of a double-edged sword if you forget a crucial detail in an important ritual. By noon, you're moving from the sacred grove to the communal areas. It's time to play the part of a judge or perhaps a counselor. Disputes don't solve themselves, and you're here to ensure that justice is served, Druid style. This might mean mediating a land dispute or ensuring that a marriage alliance goes smoothly. Your word is respected, if not feared. You're the law and order in a time when Roman law is just a stone's throw away, but not always welcome. It's a life that's as much about managing the affairs of the earth as it is about the affairs of the spirit. You're a walking contradiction, a sage who's also a bit of a pragmatist. Your role is vital, your influence undeniable, and your mornings are packed with more action than any episode of a binge-worthy series. As you move through your day, you're not just maintaining the status quo, you're actively shaping the future, one ritual, one judgment, and one wise word at a time. As you move through your day, you're not just maintaining the status quo, you're actively shaping the future, one ritual, one judgment, and one wise word at a time. But hey, it's the middle of the day now, and you're about to switch hats from legal eagle to the village sage and healer. So, let's talk about how your midday is anything but a leisurely lunch break. First off, let's get something straight. While your role as a teacher might not involve chalkboards or pop quizzes, it's still a rigorous gig. You're the ancient world's equivalent of a TED Talk, minus the PowerPoint slides. Young apprentices come to you for wisdom, or at least knowledge that's a step above what they'd pick up from their family's fireside tales. You teach them the intricacies of the natural world, from the cycles of the moon to the medicinal properties of local flora. Yeah, that's right. You're the original herbalist, long before essential oils and Instagram wellness influencers were a thing. Speaking of plants, your knowledge of herbal medicine is legendary, or at least it's been the stuff of legends. While some believe you can cure ailments with a single spell, the reality is a bit more grounded. Your medicine cabinet isn't stocked with magic potions, but rather a variety of plants. Willow bark for pain relief, yarrow for bleeding, and maybe even foxglove. Though you'd better dose that one carefully, or you might end up curing your patient of life altogether. It's a fine line between healer and accidental poisoner, but hey, no pressure, right? Now, let's tackle the myth of the all-seeing, all-knowing druid. Sure, you dabble in astrology. After all, those stars aren't going to interpret themselves. But don't confuse this with the wizardry depicted in popular lore. You're not predicting lottery numbers. You're observing changes in the night sky, charting the movement of celestial bodies, and using this knowledge to advise on everything from planting crops to planning battles. You're basically an ancient astronomer, using the stars as your guide, not your crystal ball. And while we're debunking myths, let's talk about your supposed mystical powers. Yes, you have influence, but it's not about casting lightning bolts from your fingertips. Your real power is your mind, a sharp intellect that can sway local politics and guide tribal leaders with a few well-placed words. You might not be the one on the battlefield, but you're the strategist behind the scenes, whispering in the ears of those who are. It's less Gandalf, more Machiavelli, minus the Italian flair, of course. Politically, you're a big deal. You play a crucial role in mediating between tribes, often acting as a diplomat or even a spy. Your knowledge of the land and its people makes you a valuable asset, sometimes even more so than a well-armed legion. And remember, this is a time when Rome is the elephant in the room, or rather, the empire in the backyard. Navigating these waters requires more than just a bit of magic. It needs tact, diplomacy, and a good grasp of who owes what to whom. Now, economically speaking, your role as a healer and educator doesn't come with a paycheck, but it does come with its own perks. The community provides for you, trading goods and services in exchange for your wisdom and healing prowess. This barter system is your bread and butter, literally, since you might be trading a bit of herbal knowledge for a loaf or two. So, as you work through your midday activities, you're not just a mystical figure shrouded in mystery. You're a teacher, a healer, and a political advisor. You're shaping the minds of the young, mending the wounds of the old, and guiding the hand of the leaders. It's a pragmatic approach to what many perceive as purely mystical, a blend of science, observation, and just a dash of charisma. Your day is a whirlwind of activity, and you're the calm center of it all, navigating the chaos with wisdom and a touch of wry humor. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, you're wrapping up your midday duties. But don't get too comfortable. The day isn't over yet. There are still rituals to perform, disputes to settle, and maybe even a prophecy or two to deliver. Because in this world, where the lines between the mystical and the mundane blur, you're the one who helps keep it all in balance, and who knows what the evening will bring. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the ancient landscape, it's time to switch gears. Afternoon brings a different set of challenges and responsibilities. You're not just a spiritual guru, you're the tribal equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. Versatile and indispensable. Let's dive into your advisory role, shall we? First up, you're a go-to confidant for tribal leaders, a kind of ancient strategy consultant without the PowerPoint presentations. Your insight is sought after like a hot commodity on eBay, only there's no bidding war. Just the silent expectation that your words will steer the tribe toward prosperity or survival, depending on the day. Leaders come to you not because they're starstruck by your mystical aura, but because you've got the goods, knowledge of the land, the people, and the stars above. Your advice could mean the difference between a bountiful harvest and a barren winter, making you a key player in the tribe's economic survival. Speaking of economics, let's chat about land management, a topic that would make even the most patient listener's eyes glaze over if you didn't spice it up with a little druidic wisdom. In a world without spreadsheets or Google Earth, the Druids were the human equivalent of a land survey app. You know the terrain intimately, from the fertile lowlands where barley sways in the breeze to the rugged highlands where sheep roam. Your knowledge of crop rotation, soil fertility, and seasonal weather patterns is the stuff of legends, or at least it's enough to keep the granary stocked and the people fed. But let's debunk a myth while we're here. Druids weren't omnipotent overlords of the green and pleasant land. Sure, you had influence, but you weren't handing out decrees like a benevolent dictator. Your role was more about advising and less about dictating. It's a bit like being the tribe's favorite uncle. Everyone listens to your stories, but they might not always take your advice. You're there to gently nudge the community in the right direction, not to shove them off the cliff of bad decisions. Now, let's tackle the romanticized notion of druidic omnipotence. Pop culture loves to paint you as an all-powerful being, commanding the elements with a flick of your wrist. Reality check, you're not Gandalf, and this isn't Middle-earth. Your power lies in your knowledge and your ability to mediate and negotiate. When it comes to tribal disputes, you're the voice of reason in a room full of hotheads. You're the one who can diffuse tensions with a well-timed quip or a judicious bit of advice. In a world where disputes could easily escalate into blood feuds, your role as a peacemaker is invaluable. But let's not kid ourselves, sometimes your mediation skills are put to the test. When two tribes are at loggerheads over a piece of land or a trade route, you're the one who steps in to broker peace. It's a delicate dance, requiring diplomacy and a touch of cunning. You're not above using a bit of psychological warfare to get both sides to see reason, whether it's through a cleverly worded prophecy or a carefully staged ritual. And while we're on the subject of rituals, let's not forget their economic significance. These aren't just feel-good ceremonies, they have tangible impacts on the tribe's fortunes. A well-timed ritual can ensure a good harvest or protect against disease, making them as essential to the tribe's survival as any strategic alliance. You're not just the spiritual heart of the community, you're its economic backbone, ensuring that the wheels of trade and agriculture keep turning smoothly. So, as the afternoon wears on, you're not just another mystical figure shrouded in robes and mystery. You're a pragmatic advisor, a mediator, and a strategist. You're the one who keeps the tribal machine running smoothly, balancing the needs of the community with the challenges of the world beyond. It's a role that requires intelligence, diplomacy, and no small amount of charm. And just when you think your duties are wrapping up, there's always another issue demanding your attention. Maybe it's a border dispute with a neighboring tribe, or a new trade opportunity with the Romans. Yes, those Romans, the ones with their sandals firmly planted on your tribal lands. You've got to navigate these waters with skill and tact, ensuring that your tribe benefits without losing its identity or autonomy. As the day heads toward its close, you're left to ponder the delicate balance you maintain between myth and reality. Your role is both revered and misunderstood. A complex tapestry woven from the threads of history, legend, and the everyday grind. You're not just a figure of mystique, you're a vital part of the tribe's survival strategy, a linchpin in the social and economic fabric of your world. There's more to discuss, of course, but the day isn't over yet. As dusk begins to settle, there are still questions to answer, plans to make, and maybe a prophecy or two to deliver. Because in this ancient world, where the lines between the mystical and the mundane blur like a watercolor painting left in the rain, you're the one who helps keep it all in balance. And who knows what the evening will bring? The sun has set, and the landscape of ancient Britain is now painted in shades of twilight. As the stars begin to twinkle overhead, you, the Druid priest, prepare for the evening's activities. This isn't a time for lounging about like some ancient couch potato. No, the evening is when the community comes together, and your role shifts from strategist to cultural custodian. Let's kick things off by busting a big myth, the secretive Druid ceremonies. If you're imagining cloaked figures chanting in hushed tones around flickering fires, well, you're not entirely wrong, but it's not Hogwarts on a camping trip either. These gatherings are more like a village meeting with a spiritual twist, where everyone from the local farmer to the tribal chief is welcome. It's less about secrecy and more about community cohesion. Your role in these gatherings is crucial. You're the keeper of oral traditions, the ancient version of a hard drive with a beard. Stories and songs aren't just entertainment, they're the glue that holds your culture together. Through these tales, you pass down the tribe's history, laws, and values. And let's be honest, there's nothing quite like a good story to keep people engaged. Forget Netflix, you're the original binge-worthy series. But here's the kicker. These stories aren't just pulled from thin air, they're meticulously curated and adapted to fit the current social and political climate. Think of it as ancient PR. You're not just recounting history, you're shaping it. By emphasizing certain tales and glossing over others, you subtly influence the tribe's perception of itself and its place in the world. It's storytelling with a side of social engineering. Now, let's talk about rituals. While they may not involve hocus pocus, they're still a spectacle to behold. These ceremonies often center around the cycles of nature, the solstices, equinoxes, and other celestial events. You're not just marking time, you're reinforcing the tribe's connection to the natural world. And yes, sometimes this involves sacrifices, but let's not get dramatic. These offerings are more about reciprocity with nature than appeasing some bloodthirsty deity. Economically speaking, these gatherings are a big deal. They're an opportunity for trade and social networking. The ancient version of LinkedIn, if you will. Goods and services are exchanged, alliances are forged, and disputes are settled. You're the mediator, ensuring everything runs smoothly. Your role is to maintain harmony, not just spiritually, but also socially and economically. And speaking of social dynamics, these gatherings are a great place to witness the tribe's hierarchy in action. It's a bit like a medieval soap opera, with power plays and alliances shifting like sands in the wind. You're the one who ensures that the social fabric doesn't unravel, using your influence to keep the peace and promote unity. It's a delicate balance, requiring tact and a keen understanding of human nature. Let's not forget your role as a lawgiver. In a world without written statutes, you're the living embodiment of justice. Your word carries weight, and while you might not be donning a judge's wig, your pronouncements are respected, if not feared. You're the one who ensures that the tribe's laws are upheld, using your knowledge of tradition and your sharp wit to mediate disputes. And here's where things get interesting. While your role may seem purely ceremonial, it's deeply political. You're not just maintaining the status quo, you're actively shaping it. By reinforcing certain traditions and altering others, you subtly guide the tribe's evolution. It's a bit Machiavellian, but hey, someone's got to do it. Now, Let's address the myth of the all-knowing Druid. Sure, you're knowledgeable, but you're not a walking encyclopedia. Your power lies in your ability to adapt and improvise. You might not have Google at your fingertips, but you've got a lifetime of experience and a sharp mind, which is just as valuable. You're the original problem solver, tackling everything from crop failures to tribal disputes with a blend of wisdom and wit. As the evening unfolds, you're at the center of it all, weaving threads of history, law, and culture into a tapestry that holds the tribe together. Your role is as much about fostering cultural continuity as it is about maintaining order. You're the guardian of the tribe's identity, ensuring that its traditions are passed down to future generations. So, as the night deepens and the stars blaze in the sky, you're not just a mystical figure shrouded in mystery. You're a vital part of the tribe's survival, a linchpin in its social and economic fabric. Your evening might be filled with rituals and storytelling, but it's also a time of reflection and planning. Because in this ancient world where the lines between the mystical and the mundane blur like a watercolor painting left in the rain, you're the one who helps keep it all in balance. And who knows what the evening will bring? As the night deepens, you find yourself pondering the Druidic legacy, a legacy that's as enduring as it is enigmatic. Let's face it, the Druids were the original enigma wrapped in a wool tunic. Their influence on Celtic culture is a tapestry woven with threads of wisdom, superstition, and the occasional human sacrifice. Because nothing says we're serious about spirituality quite like a bit of ritual drama. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or rather, the empire in the grove, the Romans. Those toga-wearing conquerors were like the universe's original party crashers, stomping their sandals all over the Druidic landscape. In their quest to expand the Roman Empire, they weren't just building roads and aqueducts, they were also paving over centuries of Celtic tradition. By the time the Romans had their way, many Druidic practices were erased faster than a poorly received tweet. Yet, the Druidic legacy didn't vanish into the ether. Instead, it was mythologized, romanticized, and occasionally misinterpreted by later generations. The Romans, for all their organizational prowess, didn't leave behind a comprehensive Druidic handbook. Their accounts are sparse, often portraying Druids as mysterious, possibly dangerous figures. But let's not forget, history is written by the victors, or in this case, the invaders. Fast forward a few centuries, and Druids have become the darlings of medieval bards and Renaissance romantics. Our mysterious priests morphed into mystical figures, part Merlin, part Gandalf, with a soupçon of New Age guru thrown in for good measure. This mythologizing is a testament to their enduring appeal, a testament that speaks volumes about human nature's love for a good story, even one that blurs the lines between fact and fiction. The modern interpretations of Druids often miss the mark, focusing on the mystical while ignoring the practical realities. Sure, they had a flair for the dramatic, but at their core, Druids were pragmatists. They were the scientists, legal experts, and community leaders of their time. They weren't just about chanting and charms, they were about understanding the world and using that knowledge to guide their people. Let's debunk another myth while we're at it. The Druids as solitary sages, living out their days in isolated contemplation. In reality, they were deeply embedded in their communities. They were the ones ensuring that the tribe's economic engine kept chugging along, whether through strategic alliances or meticulous land management. Their role was less about magic and more about making sure the barn didn't burn down. The legacy of the Druids is a testament to the power of oral tradition, a tradition that has survived the test of time despite the absence of written records. Their knowledge was passed down through generations, like a really intense game of telephone, with each priest adding their own spin to the story. This oral tradition is a double-edged sword. It allows for adaptation and evolution, but it also leaves room for misinterpretation and embellishment. And speaking of embellishment, let's talk about the Druids' supposed omniscience. They weren't all-knowing oracles. They were more akin to ancient data analysts, using patterns and observations to make educated guesses about the future. Their predictions were based on careful study, not divine revelation, though a little theatrical flair never hurt when trying to convince a skeptical audience. The Druids' influence on Celtic culture is undeniable, but their legacy extends beyond the boundaries of ancient Britain. Their practices and beliefs have left an indelible mark on modern spiritual movements, from Wicca to neo-paganism. The image of the Druid as a wise, nature-loving sage resonates with contemporary seekers yearning for a deeper connection with the natural world. In the end, the Druid's legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of fact, fiction, and everything in between. Their story is one of resilience, adaptation, and timeless appeal. It's a story that reminds us of the power of knowledge, the importance of community, and the enduring allure of the unknown. As you wrap up your day, remember that the legacy of the Druids is not just a relic of the past, it's a living tradition, one that continues to inspire and captivate our imaginations. So as you drift off to sleep, let the tales of the Druids weave through your dreams, a reminder that history is not just about what happened, but about what we choose to remember. The Druids may be gone, but their spirit lingers on, a testament to the power of myth, memory, and the human desire to find meaning in the mysteries of the world. Your world is a collision of dirt and destiny, my friend. Welcome to the 19th century Brazilian countryside, where the soil is as red as your ambitions and the air is thick with the scent of opportunity. Or is that just the sweat of the labourers? Either way, you're a farmer standing at the crossroads of history, where the thump of coffee beans being bagged echoes like the heartbeat of a nation on the rise. Let's talk land for a moment. In this era, if you own land, you're practically royalty. Or at least you feel like it when you're not squinting into the sun, hoping the rains come before your crops wither. The agricultural landscape is vast, stretching from the sugarcane fields of Pernambuco to the coffee-rich hills of Sao Paulo. Land ownership is a tangled web, with much of it concentrated in the hands of a few. By 1888, around 2.5 million slaves were labouring on these lands, a grim backbone to the booming economy. The few who own it all, the so-called coffee barons, are living the high life, their fortunes dripping as thick as the coffee they export. But what about you, the small farmer trying to carve out a piece of this sun-baked pie? It's a tough gig. The market demands are as fickle as a cat's affection, and nature's whims aren't helping either. One moment, the coffee boom is turning everyone into an overnight success story. The next, you're praying to the rain gods not to drown your hopes in a deluge or leave them parched under an unforgiving sun. Slavery, a dark and undeniable thread in this tapestry of farmland and fortune, casts a long shadow. It's an uncomfortable truth. Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery, holding out until 1888. Until then, the labour force on those plantations was not there by choice. The stories of those enslaved are not romantic tales of pastoral life, but hard truths of oppression and survival. It's a system that props up the economy while morally bankrupting it. But let's not paint everyone with the same brush. The 19th century is nothing if not a century of contradictions. While the coffee barons rake it in, smallholders like you are wrestling with the realities of subsistence farming. You're not just growing crops, you're battling the elements, economic instability, and a social order that sometimes feels as impenetrable as the Amazon jungle itself. Meanwhile, the world beyond your fields is in flux. Brazil's political landscape is shifting like the sands of a riverbank, with emperors and republicans bickering over who gets to sit on top. Emperor Pedro II, a man more interested in science and culture than the glories of war, presides over a country that's as diverse as it is divided. The economy's backbone might be agricultural, but the political winds are blowing towards industrialization and urbanization. In other words, change is in the air, even if it hasn't quite reached your fields yet. As you toil under the sun, it's easy to romanticize the idea of the self-made man, the farmer pulling himself up by his bootstraps. But the truth is, those boots are probably worn through, and the ladder to success is missing a few rungs. The coffee trade, for all its intoxicating aroma and potential wealth, is as volatile as the tropical storms that occasionally sweep through, flattening your dreams like a poorly built shack. Yet hope is a stubborn weed. You plant your seeds with it, water your crops with it, and hold it close as you watch the horizon for signs of the future. Brazil is a land of promise and paradox, where dreams can sprout as easily as they can be trampled. In this world of red earth and green dreams, you're not just a farmer, you're a survivor, navigating the complexities of a society that's as rich and bitter as a cup of its finest export. Keep your eyes on the sky and your hands in the soil. The story of Brazil is still being written, and you're part of its next chapter. In the thick of Brazil's promise and paradox, your day as a 19th century farmer kicks off with the sun, a relentless alarm clock that refuses to snooze. Forget about a gentle morning routine. It's more of a sunrise slap to the face, and you've got chores lined up like soldiers at roll call. You've got to milk the cows, feed the chickens, and wrestle with the pig that's convinced it's a contender for the local wrestling championship, all before breakfast. Now, let's talk about breakfast. It's not so much a meal as it is a quick pit stop to refuel before the real work kicks in. You might wolf down some pão de queijo if you're lucky, or just a piece of stale bread washed down with a sip of strong coffee. This isn't about gourmet flavors. It's about getting enough energy to face the fields without keeling over. On the farm, the technology is as cutting-edge as a butter knife. We're not talking about John Deere tractors or fancy irrigation systems here. No, your tools are as rudimentary as they come. A plough, a hoe, maybe a mule if you're feeling particularly modern. That plough? It's likely a wooden contraption that's seen better days, and it's powered by sheer will and maybe a very stubborn ox. The fields don't care about your backache or blisters. They demand to be tended with a ferocity that would make a drill sergeant blush. The reality is, pastoral life is far from the idyllic picture painted by romantic tales. You're knee-deep in mud, swatting at mosquitoes the size of small birds, and dodging snakes that seem to have a personal vendetta against you. And let's not forget the weather, as predictably unpredictable as a soap opera plot twist. 1 minute, the sun is blazing down like it's auditioning for a role in Inferno, the musical, and the next, the skies open up with a deluge that Noah would have found excessive. Family dynamics on the farm are another layer of charming chaos with an emphasis on chaos. It's a family business, which means everyone's roped into the daily grind. Your wife might be handling the household, but she's also out in the fields, planting or harvesting alongside you. The kids? They're not just running around causing mischief. They're your unpaid labor force, learning the ropes of survival before they've even lost their baby teeth. Schooling is a luxury for many, reserved for those who can afford to spare their children from the relentless cycle of planting and harvesting. Amidst this whirlwind, you can't help but laugh at the myth of the simple, carefree farmer's life. Whoever coined that phrase clearly never battled a swarm of locusts or tried to outsmart a weevil invasion. Pests are the uninvited guests at your farming party, crashing in with their insatiable appetites and zero respect for your hard work. And when they're not feasting on your crops, plagues could sweep through like a grim reaper of agriculture, turning your fields into barren wastelands faster than you can say crop rotation. Despite these challenges, there's an undeniable allure to the pastoral life. Sure, it's exhausting, and the odds often feel stacked against you, but there's something rewarding about working the land. It's tangible, it's real, and when those rains do come just right, when the pests decide to take a vacation, there's a moment of triumph that tastes sweeter than any sugarcane. You might be one crop failure away from ruin, but when things go right, you feel like you've pulled off a miracle. Economically, though, it's a tightrope walk without a safety net. The fluctuation in coffee prices can turn your fortunes on a dime. The 1860s saw coffee prices boom, only to crash spectacularly a decade later, leaving many farmers scrambling to recover. You're part of this roller coaster economy, where one season's profits could vanish by the next due to market unpredictability or Mother Nature's whims. It's a high-stakes game, and you're often playing with a hand that's less than ideal. This is the reality of life on a 19th-century Brazilian farm. Far from the romanticized notion of pastoral bliss, it's a constant struggle, a battle against forces both seen and unseen, with stakes as high as the Brazilian mountains. Yet, with every sunrise, you rise too, ready to face the land, the weather, and the whims of a world that never quite stands still. You're not just a farmer, you're a living testament to resilience, a player in the grand narrative of a nation built on sweat, soil, and the unyielding spirit of its people. As the sun arcs across the Brazilian sky, you're not just a farmer, you're a gambler, rolling dice on the fertile yet fickle fields of Sao Paulo's hills. But let's shift gears from the daily grind of sowing and reaping to the economic forces that can elevate you to coffee king, or leave you penniless, clutching a withered stalk of dreams. Welcome to the high-stakes world of the 19th-century coffee trade, where fortunes rise and fall faster than you can say Arabica. Coffee isn't just a drink here, it's a lifestyle, an economic powerhouse that fuels Brazil's growth. driving its economy like a steam engine on steroids. By 1880, Brazil was producing over 40% of the world's coffee, making it a cornerstone of global trade. You'd think that would secure a steady income for farmers, right? Not so fast. The market's a beast with a mind of its own, and it can be as unpredictable as a cat on catnip. Let's talk numbers. Coffee prices in the 1860s were like a thrill-seeking stock market, with a boom in demand that sent prices skyrocketing. But just like any good thrill ride, the ascent was followed by a plummet. The 1870s saw prices drop, driving many farmers to the brink of financial ruin. You're part of this roller coaster, clutching your coffee sacks and hoping you don't get tossed off during the next downturn. So, how do you keep your head above water? For starters, transportation is crucial. The infrastructure in 19th century Brazil was as reliable as a papier-mâché umbrella in a monsoon. Transporting your precious beans from the farm to the port in Santos wasn't a leisurely Sunday drive, it was a logistical nightmare. Roads, more like glorified mud tracks, barely passable during the rainy season. Railroads were just starting to weave their way through the landscape, with the Sao Paulo Railway Company laying tracks in the 1860s, a godsend for those who could afford to tap into it. A farmer without access to these rails was like a modern-day commuter without Wi-Fi, stuck and frustrated. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of financial survival. Loans and debts were the double-edged swords of the farming world. Need to buy seed or repair equipment? It's off to the local moneylender you go, cap in hand, hoping they'll take a chance on you. Interest rates were brutal, often as high as 12%, a figure that could make or break your season. Defaulting on a loan? That's a one-way ticket to losing your land faster than you can mutter insolvency. But don't despair, cunning farmers had tricks up their sleeves. Diversification was one such strategy. Some farmers hedged their bets by planting sugarcane alongside coffee, spreading risk like butter on toast. Others formed cooperatives, strength in numbers, right? By banding together, they negotiated better prices and terms, creating a buffer against market volatility. It was a smart move, but not without its challenges. Convincing a group of independent-minded farmers to play nice was about as easy as herding cats with a squirt gun. Then there are the tales of those who didn't make it. The cautionary anecdotes of farmers who bet everything on coffee and lost it all to a bad harvest or a market crash. These stories are the ghost stories of the farming world, whispered warnings to remind you of the razor-thin line between success and failure. But they're not just stories. They're the harsh realities that kept farmers up at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if tomorrow would bring ruin or redemption. What about the political backdrop? While you're knee-deep in coffee plants, Brazil itself is riding its own wave of change. The abolition of slavery in 1888 is a seismic shift, one that shakes the very foundations of your workforce. Suddenly, the labor that was once forced is now free, and you're scrambling to adapt to this new reality. It's a game changer, and not everyone is ready to play by the new rules. Speaking of labor, let's not forget the wave of immigrants flooding into Brazil like a caffeinated tide. Italians, Portuguese, Germans, they're all looking for their slice of the Brazilian dream. For many farmers, this influx is a lifeline, offering a new labor force as slavery ends. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Tensions flare, wages need negotiating, and cultural clashes are as common as mosquitoes in the summer. In this complex web of economics, politics, and social change, you're more than a farmer. You're a strategist, a negotiator, a risk-taker. Each decision you make, from which seeds to plant to how much debt to shoulder, reverberates through your life like the echo of a distant thunderstorm. The coffee trade might be a harsh mistress, but for those who navigate its treacherous waters with skill and a bit of luck, it's a mistress worth courting. So, as you stand on your plot of land, surveying the rows of coffee plants swaying in the breeze, remember this. Farming in 19th century Brazil was never just about coaxing crops from the earth. It was a high-wire act of economic acrobatics, a dance with destiny on a stage as vast as the country itself. The stakes are high, the odds often stacked against you, but the payoff, well, that's enough to keep you planting, hoping, and dreaming under the Brazilian sun. As you stand on your plot of land, surveying those coffee plants like a general with his troops, let's pivot to the political storms brewing on the horizon, because if there's one thing that can upend a farmer's life faster than a bad frost, it's politics. And in 19th century Brazil, politics was as volatile as the weather, with changes that could make or break your farming dreams. Enter Emperor Pedro II, the unlikely ruler whose interests lay more in telescopes and thermometers than in thrones and territory. His reign, from 1831 to 1889, was a mixed bag of enlightened ideas and stubborn traditions. Picture this. You've got a monarch who's all about modernization, yet he's ruling over a system that still relies on the back-breaking labor of enslaved people. Talk about living in contradictory times. But Pedro II did have his moments of glory. Under his rule, Brazil saw the first telegraph lines and railways, crucial for getting your coffee beans from the hinterlands to the bustling ports. Now, let's talk about the elephant, or rather, the institution, in the room, slavery. When Brazil finally abolished slavery in 1888, it was like a tectonic shift in the social landscape. 2.5 million enslaved people suddenly found themselves free, and the plantations had to scramble to replace their labor force. For many farmers, this was a shockwave that rippled through their operations. Suddenly you needed to consider wages, working conditions, and labor negotiations, concepts as foreign as a snowstorm in the Amazon. Here's where the myth-busting comes in. The abolition of slavery wasn't just a moral victory, it was an economic necessity. The pressure from the British, who had long since washed their hands of the slave trade, was mounting. Brazil had to adapt or risk being left behind in the global market, where morality was fast becoming a currency of its own. But let's not pretend this transition was smooth. The move from slave to wage labor was messy, fraught with tensions and conflicts. Many former slaves, now free but with limited resources, found themselves working the same lands, just under different terms. Speaking of terms, let's dive into the murky waters of land reform. The 19th century was a time when land was power, and the concentration of land in the hands of a few was as much a political statement as it was an economic reality. The Sesmarius system, a relic from Portuguese colonial times, meant that vast swaths of fertile land were controlled by a small elite. Imagine trying to carve out your own slice of paradise when the best plots were already claimed by the coffee barons. It was like trying to snag a front row seat at a sold-out concert. Good luck with that. The Republic's dawn in 89 promised sweeping changes. The monarchy was out, and a new era of republicanism was in. But the reality? Well, revolutions are rarely as tidy as their slogans suggest. This new political landscape was a wild west of sorts, with power struggles and shifting allegiances. For many farmers, these changes were as welcome as a locust swarm. Suddenly, you had to navigate a new bureaucratic maze to secure your land rights, and the stakes were high. Lose your land, and you lose your livelihood. Farmers found themselves caught in this political crossfire, sometimes literally. Align with the wrong faction, and you could find your crops torched, or your family threatened. In this era, political involvement was not for the faint-hearted. It was a game of chess, with real-world consequences. The stakes? As high as a coffee baron's mansion, and the risks? As deadly as a duel at dawn. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there was opportunity. The land laws under the Republic sought to redistribute land more equitably, at least in theory. For small farmers, this was a beacon of hope, a chance to finally secure their own piece of the Brazilian dream. But, as with all good promises, the devil was in the details. Bureaucratic red tape and corruption often meant that these reforms favoured those who already had connections. Let's not forget the international players leaning over the Brazilian board game. Countries like the United States were keenly watching Brazil's every move, especially with the coffee trade being such a crucial part of their breakfast tables. Brazil was a key player in global economics, and its internal policies reverberated far beyond its borders. So, here you are, a farmer in 19th century Brazil, navigating a world where political tides can flood your fields just as surely as the spring rains. The abolition of slavery and the shift to a republic aren't just headlines, they're seismic shifts that rattle every aspect of your existence. The romantic notion of the self-sufficient farmer? It's got more holes than a moth-eaten coat. You're not just tilling soil, you're tilling a future in a nation struggling to define itself amidst the chaos of change. As Brazil fumbles its way into the Republic era, you find yourself clinging to whatever stability you can muster. The political landscape might be as unpredictable as a soap opera plot, but your resolve is as steady as the sunrise. You're not just a spectator in this unfolding drama, you're an actor, a strategist, a survivor. And as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of hope and uncertainty, you brace yourself for tomorrow's challenges, ready to write your own chapter in Brazil's tumultuous history. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of hope and uncertainty, you brace yourself for tomorrow's challenges, ready to write your own chapter in Brazil's tumultuous history. But let's take a moment to zoom out from your plot of land and look at the wider picture, the legacy of 19th century Brazilian farming on today's agricultural landscape. Fast forward to the 21st century, where Brazil has emerged as a bona fide agricultural powerhouse. We're talking about a country that leads the world in soybeans, sugarcane, and yes, still, coffee. It's as if the nation traded its colonial shackles for a seat at the global agriculture table, and it all started with the resilience and innovation of farmers like you. Let's talk numbers. Today, Brazil's agriculture sector accounts for about 25% of its GDP, and the country's exports feed over 1 billion people worldwide. That's not just impressive, it's borderline superhero status. But how did a nation once reliant on manual labor and rudimentary tools become a global agri-giant? The seeds of this transformation were sown by the 19th century farmers who dared to innovate despite limited resources. Take crop rotation and diversification, for instance. While your ancestors didn't invent these concepts, they sure gave them a Brazilian twist. Faced with soil exhaustion and pestilence, they experimented out of necessity. Planting beans alongside coffee or alternating sugarcane with grains wasn't just about survival. It was an early form of sustainability. Today, these practices are standard fare in modern agriculture, hailed for their ability to maintain soil health and boost yields. And let's not forget the labor force transformation. The abolition of slavery was a turning point that forced farmers to rethink labor dynamics into the influx of European immigrants eager and willing to work. This diverse pool of laborers powered the plantations and brought with them fresh ideas, from new farming techniques to different crop varieties. The cultural melting pot became Brazil's secret weapon, laying the groundwork for its future successes. Moving on to technology, the 19th century's crude tools have evolved into cutting-edge machinery. But the spirit of innovation that drove farmers to make do with wooden plows and stubborn oxen still pulses through the veins of Brazilian agriculture. Today's farmers wield tech like drones for crop monitoring and GPS-guided tractors, but the essence remains unchanged: adapt or perish. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. The romanticized notion of the rugged individualist farmer toiling away in splendid isolation is as mythical as a unicorn sipping a latte. The reality was, and still is, a community effort. Farmers relied on neighborly cooperation, whether through informal labor exchanges or formal cooperatives. Today, cooperatives are a cornerstone of Brazilian agriculture, helping small farmers access credit, technology, and markets they couldn't reach alone. It's proof that the communal spirit of the past is alive and well, albeit with a modern twist. But not all legacies are rosy. The concentration of land ownership, a relic from the Sesmaria system, is a ghost that still haunts Brazilian agriculture. Even now, a significant portion of arable land remains in the hands of a few large landowners. Land reform has been a contentious issue for decades, a political hot potato no one seems keen to hold. It's a stark reminder that while some battles have been won, the war for equitable land distribution continues. On the environmental front, Brazil's expansion into the Amazon for agriculture is a double-edged sword. The drive to increase farmland has led to deforestation, a practice that echoes the land-hungry ambitions of the 19th century coffee barons. It's a dance with ecological disaster, one that threatens to undo the progress made by sustainable practices. Balancing economic growth with environmental stewardship is the modern farmer's dilemma, a direct descendant of the 19th century struggle to balance profit and ethics. And then there's the ever-present spectre of climate change. If the 19th century farmer had to contend with unpredictable weather, today's farmer faces an even more capricious climate. Droughts, floods, and temperature swings are the new normal, pushing agriculture to the brink. But here, too, lies an opportunity, a chance to innovate once more. From developing drought-resistant crops to investing in water-efficient irrigation, the legacy of resilience continues. In wrapping up this historical journey, let's tip our hats to the unsung heroes, the farmers who, through grit and determination, laid the groundwork for Brazil's agricultural might. Their legacy is more than just a story of survival, it's a testament to the power of human ingenuity in the face of adversity. As you stand on your plot of land, a modern farmer with one foot in the past and the other in the future, remember this: history isn't just a collection of dates and events, but a living narrative that shapes who we are and what we can become. So, the next time you sip your coffee or enjoy a Brazilian steak, take a moment to appreciate the complex tapestry woven by those who came before. The myths of pastoral bliss are just that, myths. But within those myths lie kernels of truth, lessons in resilience, tenacity, and community that continue to resonate today. You're not just a farmer standing on the shoulders of giants, you're part of a legacy, one that reaches far beyond the red earth and green dreams of your ancestors. And as the Brazilian sun sets, casting long shadows over your fields, remember that the story of agriculture is far from over. With each seed you plant and each harvest you gather, you're writing the next chapter in the epic saga of a nation that dared to dream big and grow even bigger. In the grand theatre of ancient history, where empires rose and fell like badly managed startups, the Phoenicians were the unsung heroes, or maybe the world's first successful seafaring entrepreneurs. Nestled in the narrow coastal strip that we now call Lebanon, these folks had a knack for maritime trade that left everyone else paddling in their wake. And let's be honest, when your neighbours are the likes of Egypt and Mesopotamia, you need to punch above your weight class. The Phoenicians did just that, turning their limited real estate into a bustling hub of commerce, innovation, and, dare we say, proto-globalization. Let's set sail on this tale by anchoring ourselves in some hard facts. The Phoenicians occupied a mere 200 miles of coastline, a slender stretch that was mostly rocky and unfit for agriculture. But what they lacked in arable land, they more than made up for with a coastline that was a shipbuilder's dream. You could say they were the Elon Musk of boat building, while others were still trying to figure out how to steer a cart. By the second millennium BCE, they had perfected the art of shipbuilding to such a degree that they were cruising the Mediterranean like they owned it. Their iconic biremes and triremes ships with 2 and 3 rows of oars, respectively, were the speed demons of the seas, clocking in at speeds that would make Poseidon nod in approval. Now, onto their economic wizardry. The Phoenicians turned their maritime prowess into a commercial empire, trading everything from the mundane to the magnificent. Picture this: cedarwood from Lebanon, known as the wood of the gods, was a hot commodity. Why? Because it was perfect for building temples, ships, and furniture that screamed, "I'm important, and you should notice." And let's not forget the famous Tyrian purple dye, extracted laboriously from the murex snail. This colour was so exclusive that it became synonymous with royalty. In today's terms, wearing Tyrian purple was like rocking a designer outfit that cost the GDP of a small country. But what really set the Phoenicians apart was their knack for turning trade into a fine art. They didn't just move goods, they moved cultures, ideas, and even alphabets. Their most enduring legacy? The development of an alphabetic script, which was a game-changer for literacy and communication. Before this, writing was the exclusive domain of scribes with years of training in complex cuneiform or hieroglyphics. The Phoenician script democratized writing, much like the printing press would do millennia later. And let's not overlook their role in spreading the script along their trade routes, effectively sowing the seeds for the alphabets used by the Greeks and eventually the Romans. You could say they were the original influencers. Now, while the romantic image of Phoenician mariners bravely venturing into uncharted waters is tempting, the reality was a bit more pragmatic. The Mediterranean was their playground, but they stuck mostly to the coastlines, rarely venturing too far from sight of land. Their navigational skills were top-notch, but they weren't exactly crossing the Atlantic. Still, for their time, they were the masters of the seas, and their maritime network stretched from the Levant to North Africa, and even as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Ah, the myth of the intrepid Phoenician explorer, braving sea monsters and storms, is a tale as old as time. While it makes for great storytelling, it's worth noting that their voyages were often guided by a keen eye for profit rather than adventure. They were merchants first, explorers second. And in a world where survival often depended on your ability to outsmart both nature and your neighbours, The Phoenicians were the ones who knew how to play the game and win. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the world of the Phoenicians, the ancient mariners who turned a rocky sliver of land into the Mediterranean's marketplace. They were the original maritime maestros, teaching the art of the deal long before anyone had heard of Wall Street. As we delve deeper into their history, remember this. The Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the architects of a connected world, laying the groundwork for the bustling global trade networks we know today. In their ships and trade routes, we see the echoes of our own interconnected world, where the seas are still highways of commerce, and where the spirit of the Phoenicians sails on. Speaking of interconnected worlds, let's dive straight into the Phoenicians' bustling trade network. These ancient traders had a knack for weaving trade routes as complex as a Game of Thrones plot, stretching from Cyprus to Carthage. While modern folks might plan a European summer road trip, the Phoenicians were planning sea voyages that spanned the Mediterranean. Their network was the ancient equivalent of an Amazon distribution center linked by sea lanes instead of fiber optics. Now, let's talk about how they transformed mundane products into luxury items that would make even the Kardashians take notice. Take the Tyrian purple dye, for example. This wasn't just any color, it was the color. This dye was extracted from the murex snail, a process so labor-intensive you'd think it was producing liquid gold. It took about 12,000 snails just to produce 1.5 grams of dye, enough to color the trim of a single garment, and yet the demand was sky-high. Wearing Tyrian purple was like flaunting a Rolex in a world of sundials. It was a statement. I've arrived, and I have the snails to prove it. But wait, the Phoenicians weren't content to rest on their snaily laurels. They ventured into glass production, crafting delicate glassware that shimmered like captured sunlight. Their glass wasn't just pretty, it was practical, used for everything from storage jars to drinking vessels. Imagine hosting a dinner party in 800 BCE and having your guests ooh and ah over your Phoenician glassware. It was the ancient version of having the latest iPhone without the software updates. And let's not forget the cedar wood, their pièce de résistance. The Phoenician cedar was the iPhone 15 Pro Max of building materials. It was durable, aromatic, and resistant to rot, ideal for constructing ships and palaces alike. Everyone from the Egyptians to the Assyrians wanted a slice of the Phoenician cedar pie. King Solomon himself was said to have imported cedar for his temple, which, considering the architectural demands of the time, was like ordering custom Italian marble for your bathroom. But here's where we debunk the myth of the Phoenician mysterious traders. While tales of their enigmatic voyages abound, they were less like shadowy figures in history and more like your friendly neighborhood merchants with an exceptional business model. Their trade records, chiseled into stone tablets and clay, were as detailed as a corporate balance sheet. They weren't hiding their business practices, they were advertising them. Need a shipload of cedar? Check the ledger. Looking for the best price on purple dye? Ask a Phoenician. As for their so-called secretive nature, it was more a matter of savvy business sense than skulking in the shadows. They didn't need to shout about their trade routes from the rooftops because their reputation preceded them. They were the ancient equivalent of, if you know, you know. Their extensive records show they were anything but elusive. They were pragmatic, efficient, and remarkably transparent for the time. Their trade dealings were less about mystery and more about good old-fashioned supply and demand. Politically, the Phoenicians were adept at playing the power game. They were like the Switzerland of the ancient world, neutral yet indispensable. They established colonies and outposts like Carthage, which became a powerhouse in its own right. This wasn't just about expanding trade, it was about securing strategic footholds across the Mediterranean. Carthage itself became a trade hub, a testament to Phoenician foresight in establishing a network that could survive and thrive independently. Let's not romanticize too much, though. While the Phoenicians were indeed maritime maestros, their voyages were often fraught with danger. The Mediterranean wasn't exactly a placid pond. Storms, piracy, and political upheaval were constant threats. These traders had to be as tough as the cedar they sold, ready to adapt at a moment's notice. Their adaptability was key, allowing them to navigate not just the seas, but also the shifting political landscapes of the time. In the end, the Phoenicians were the original masters of the art of the deal. They understood the value of diversification long before it became a buzzword on Wall Street. By trading everything from glass to cedar, they ensured their economic survival even when one market dipped. They were the ancient world's answer to a diversified portfolio, ensuring that their legacy would endure long after their ships had sailed into history. As we chart this course through Phoenician history, remember, these traders were more than just merchants. They were pioneers, not only in trade, but in cultural exchange. Their roots were avenues for the spread of ideas, technologies, and innovations that would shape the ancient world. So, as we sail onward, keep an eye out for the next chapter in this maritime saga, where the Phoenicians continue to make waves in ways that echo through the ages. As we sail onward, the Phoenicians continue to make waves in ways that echo through the ages. Let's dive into their diplomatic prowess, a skill set as sharp as their shipbuilding techniques. In a world where alliances could be as fickle as a Twitter trending topic, the Phoenicians were the masters of the diplomatic dance. Imagine a high-stakes game of Risk, where the players are Egypt, Greece, Assyria, and Babylon, and the Phoenicians are that one player who never seems to get attacked because they've made deals with everyone else. Picture this. The Phoenicians, with their small but strategically located city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, turned the art of diplomacy into a finely tuned ballet. These cities were like siblings squabbling over the remote, each with its own agenda, yet ultimately united when it came to dealing with outsiders. Their secret? Pragmatism. These guys could have taught Machiavelli a thing or two about realpolitik. They understood that in a world dominated by superpowers with egos the size of their pyramids, you had to be clever, not just courageous. Take Egypt, for example. By the time the Phoenicians were in full swing, Egypt was the quintessential ancient superpower. The pharaohs, with their elaborate tombs and penchant for gold, were not the type of neighbors you wanted to annoy. The Phoenicians, ever the savvy negotiators, forged trade links that would make any modern diplomat envious. They supplied the Egyptians with cedar wood for their ships and temples, and in return they got access to the Nile's bounty. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, and the Phoenicians knew how to keep it that way. They were like the friend who always brought a bottle of wine to the party, never showing up empty-handed. Then there were the Greeks. The Greeks, famous for their philosophy, democracy, and the occasional city-state squabble that could put a modern soap opera to shame. The Phoenicians traded with them too, and their interactions were a fascinating blend of competition and cooperation. The Greeks admired Phoenician craftsmanship and their alphabet, which they adapted for their own use. Yet there was always a hint of rivalry, especially on the high seas. It was like Apple and Samsung. They might compete, but they're also borrowing ideas from each other all the time. Now, let's talk about the Assyrians. This was an empire known for its military might and a no-nonsense approach to diplomacy. Think, join us, or face the consequences. The Phoenicians were smart enough to realize that resistance was futile. Instead of going toe-to-toe with the Assyrians, they opted for a policy of appeasement, paying tribute to keep their cities safe. A calculated move, it was akin to paying a subscription fee for peace, a small price for maintaining autonomy. But the real genius of Phoenician diplomacy lay in their ability to play these powers off against each other. They were the original middlemen, ensuring that no single empire could dominate them entirely. If one power got too aggressive, the Phoenicians would simply strengthen ties with its rival. It was a delicate balancing act, and they performed it with the grace of a tightrope walker over a pit of hungry lions. Internally, however, things weren't always as harmonious. The city-states of Phoenicia were fiercely independent. Imagine a family where every sibling insists on being the favorite. While they could cooperate when necessary, they also had their share of rivalries and disputes. Tyre might have been the powerhouse, but Sidon and Byblos each had their turn in the sun. These cities were like the original corporate offices, competing for the biggest slice of the maritime pie. Despite their squabbles, the Phoenicians understood the strength of unity when it came to external threats. They were like a band that might bicker during rehearsals but came together for the big performance. This ability to unite in the face of danger was crucial, as they were often caught in the crossfire of larger geopolitical struggles. And let's not forget the role of the colonies. Carthage, the jewel of Phoenician colonization, was more than just a distant outpost. It grew into a formidable power in its own right, a testament to the Phoenicians' foresight and strategic planning. The colonies served as both trading posts and military bastions, extending Phoenician influence across the Mediterranean. They were like the franchise stores of the ancient world, ensuring that the brand remained strong and resilient. In the end, the Phoenicians were the ultimate survivors, navigating the turbulent waters of ancient geopolitics with a deftness that would make any modern leader envious. Their legacy was not just in the goods they traded or the ships they sailed, but in the connections they forged, a network of relationships that tied the ancient world together. As we continue this journey through their history, remember that the Phoenicians were not just merchants or sailors, they were the architects of an interconnected world, the original networkers who understood that sometimes the strongest weapon is a handshake. Just when you thought the Phoenicians were done surprising us, let's dive into the heart of their cultural and technological prowess. The reality check here? They weren't mystical magicians pulling alphabets out of hats. They were practical innovators, the ancient equivalent of Silicon Valley disruptors, but with fewer hoodies and more tunics. First up, the Phoenician alphabet. Forget the idea of it being some divine inspiration whispered by enigmatic gods. Nope, this was pure human ingenuity at work. Before the Phoenicians came along, writing was a laborious task left to scribes who spent years cracking the codes of complex scripts like cuneiform and hieroglyphics. Enter the Phoenicians, who streamlined this whole process with an alphabet that was so user-friendly you could learn it faster than the latest TikTok dance. Comprising 22 characters, all consonants, this script was as efficient as it was revolutionary. It spread like wildfire along their trade routes, influencing the Greeks, who added vowels, and eventually laying the groundwork for the Latin alphabet we use today. It's like the ancient world's equivalent of open-source software. Everyone could adapt it, which is why it stuck around. But why did they create it in the first place? Simple: trade. When you're running a maritime empire that stretches from the Levant to the Iberian Peninsula, you need a reliable way to keep track of transactions and communicate with partners who might be a sea away. It was the ancient version of a business app streamlining operations, increasing efficiency, and allowing even the average merchant to send a letter home or jot down a quick IOU. And then there's the matter of Phoenician cunning. Were they the slick salespeople of the ancient world, or just exceptionally savvy traders? Look, the line between the two is thinner than the parchment they wrote on. Their reputation for sharp dealing wasn't entirely undeserved. They knew how to market their goods with the same flair as a modern-day ad campaign. Take Tyrian purple dye, for instance. The labor involved in producing even a tiny amount of this luxury item was astronomical, thousands of murex snails per gram. Yet the Phoenicians turned this tedious process into a selling point. By making the dye rare and exclusive, they created a demand that was as insatiable as a teenager's appetite for Wi-Fi. It was a masterclass in supply and demand, where they controlled the narrative in the market. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their reputation for cunning sometimes meant that trust was a commodity as rare as their dye. In a world where word of mouth could make or break you, they had to balance their shrewdness with reliability. The Phoenicians walked this tightrope with the agility of a circus performer on a unicycle, knowing that any misstep could lead to a fall from grace, or worse, a loss of trade partners. Their culture, too, was a melting pot of influences, a testament to their role as the Mediterranean's middlemen. They borrowed religious elements from the Egyptians, artistic styles from the Greeks, and even architectural techniques from the Mesopotamians. This cultural chameleon act wasn't just about assimilation, it was about adaptation and survival. By embracing and integrating the best of what they encountered, the Phoenicians ensured that their own culture was as robust as their trade network. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the idea of the Phoenicians as mystical seafarers with an uncanny ability to navigate the unknown. The truth is a bit less mystical and a lot more practical. They were consummate sailors who knew the Mediterranean like the back of their all-wielding hands. They hugged the coastlines, relied on the stars and landmarks for navigation, and understood the whims of the sea with a precision that came from generations of experience. There were no sea monsters in their logs, just a meticulous attention to detail and an understanding that the real monsters were the storms and pirates that threatened their voyages. Now, as we continue to unravel the Phoenician story, remember that their legacy isn't just in ships or trade routes, it's in the way they connected worlds, ideas, and people. They were the ancient world's version of a social network, just one without the cat videos. Their innovations in writing and commerce laid the foundation for modern communication and trade, showing us that sometimes the greatest revolutions start not with a bang, but with a well-crafted letter or a cleverly marketed purple dye. So, let's keep the story rolling, because the Phoenicians have more tricks up their sleeves, and their tale is far from over. Whether they were cunning salespeople or simply ahead of their time, they prove that history's most fascinating characters often walk the line between legend and reality, leaving a legacy that's as complex as it is enduring. Let's sail into the sunset with the Phoenicians, those ancient masters of the maritime world, and reflect on the waves they left in their wake. As the sun sets on their city-states, one might think that their influence would fade with the dying light. But oh, how wrong that assumption would be. The Phoenicians were like a particularly potent perfume. Long after they've left the room, their presence lingers. Even when their cities fell, their impact spread across the Mediterranean and beyond, echoing through the centuries like the last notes of a powerful symphony. So, how did these ancient seafarers manage to leave such a lasting mark? Let's start with their contribution to global trade practices. The Phoenicians were the original creators of what we'd now call a global supply chain. They connected disparate cultures, from the Egyptians to the Iberians, through a network of trade routes that would make even Amazon blush. In a world where the fastest mode of communication was a galloping horse, the Phoenicians had established a system that spanned thousands of miles of coastline. They were the FedEx of antiquity, ensuring that goods, ideas and innovations flowed seamlessly from one part of the world to another. Their trade routes weren't just lines on a map, they were lifelines for the ancient economies that depended on them. But the Phoenicians weren't just about trade, no, they were cultural innovators too. Their alphabet, as we've discussed, was a game changer. It democratized literacy, paving the way for the spread of knowledge and culture. And let's not forget their role in cultural exchange. By acting as intermediaries, they facilitated the flow of ideas between civilizations, much like a modern-day TED Talk without the PowerPoint presentations. They were the cultural curators of their time, and through their interactions, new artistic styles, religious beliefs, and technological innovations spread more widely than ever before. Here's the kicker, though. The Phoenicians' legacy isn't just about the tangible. It's also about the intangible, the attitudes and practices that continue to shape our world today. They were the original entrepreneurs, embracing risk and reward in equal measure. Their willingness to explore new markets, adapt to changing circumstances, and innovate in the face of adversity offers lessons that still resonate in today's hyper-connected world. The Phoenicians understood the value of diversification, a lesson that investors and business leaders would do well to remember. They didn't put all their eggs in one basket, and as a result, their influence persisted long after their political power waned. Now, let's tackle the romanticism of ancient trade. It's tempting to view the Phoenician traders as fearless adventurers, braving uncharted waters in search of exotic goods. But the reality was far more pragmatic. Their voyages were often grueling, fraught with danger from storms, pirates, and political tensions. The Mediterranean might have been a highway of commerce, but it was also a battleground where fortunes could be made or lost overnight. Ships sank, goods were plundered, and lives were often at stake. The Phoenicians knew this all too well, and their success depended as much on their ability to navigate these challenges as it did on their trading prowess. Their story reminds us that history is rarely as clean or as glamorous as we might like to believe. Behind every romantic tale of adventure and discovery lies a gritty reality of hard work, risk, and sometimes even suffering. The Phoenicians were no strangers to this. They were merchants, diplomats, and sometimes even warriors, navigating a world that was as complex and unpredictable as the seas they sailed. Their legacy, then, is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, we can chart a course and make our mark on the world. So, as we wrap up our journey through the world of the Phoenicians, let's take a moment to appreciate the lasting impact of these ancient mariners. They were more than just traders. They were the architects of an interconnected world, the original seafarers who understood that the seas were not barriers, but bridges. Their legacy lives on in the trade networks that crisscross our globe, the alphabets we use to communicate, and the cultural exchanges that enrich our lives. In a world that often feels divided, the Phoenicians remind us of the power of connection and the enduring strength of human innovation. In the end, the Phoenicians were not just a chapter in history, but a lens through which we can view our own world. Their story is one of ambition, adaptability, and the relentless pursuit of opportunity. As we sail back to our own shores, let's carry with us the lessons they've taught, that the greatest legacies are built not just on what we achieve, but on the connections we forge and the stories we leave behind. And in that sense, the Phoenicians have truly sailed into eternity, their influence as enduring as the tides,